Hey guys, tonight we step onto a cool desert plateau where the sand still remembers the sun and the pyramids look like dark constellations that decided to land. You can almost taste the dry air, clean, mineral, a little like paper, and the night feels so wide your thoughts have room to stretch out. Somewhere out in the darkness, a limestone giant is holding its breath, and above it the stars are doing that slow thing they've been doing for thousands of years. If you've had a long day, this is the kind of place that doesn't ask questions. It just lets you be here, quietly impressed by a civilization that tried to outlast time with geometry. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're settling in, post your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing how many different nights we're sharing. How many little bedrooms and balconies and late shift breaks are syncing up for the same sleepy story. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air out here has that clean, dry softness, like the world has been dusted off. Each breath feels simple. The wind doesn't rush you. It just wanders past, carrying the faint smell of stone and distance. Your footsteps make a quiet, sandy hush, more of a whisper than a sound, and the desert answers by giving you space. No flashing signs, no notifications, no one asking you to be productive. Just open ground and a sky, so sharp it seems brand new. Ahead, the plateau rises in a long, gentle slope. And there they are, pyramids. Not ruins, not tourist sites, not even buildings, really. In the moonlight, they're closer to silhouettes of mountains, the kind you'd expect nature to make if nature had a ruler and a sense of drama. They sit so still that the stars around them seem to move more than they do. You don't have to be close to feel the scale. The shape does the work. A wide base that feels grounded, an angle that lifts your attention upward, and a point that looks like it's trying to poke a hole in the night. It's almost comical how confident a triangle can be. A civilization looked at the chaos of life and said, "This is the form. This is what calm looks like." This calm has a name, the Old Kingdom. It's the era when Egypt's kings become something bigger than kings, pharaohs in the fullest sense. Figures treated as the hinge between human life and the divine order. It sounds grand, and it was, but it also had a soothing practicality to it. If the pharaoh is the anchor of the universe, then keeping his world stable becomes everybody's job. Not in a frantic way, in an organized way. Cosmic order filed neatly into daily routines. Out here, you can almost feel that blend of faith and paperwork. The pyramids are sacred, yes, but they're also a national project that required calendars, supply lines, wages, and patience. Spiritual ambition powered by administration, like a prayer that comes with a spreadsheet. The night sky is part of the blueprint. The stars above you are the same stars old kingdom watchers studied, night after night, with a steadiness that feels oddly comforting. No telescopes, no screens, no dramatic announcements, just eyes, memory, and repetition. They track patterns, seasons, the slow turning of lights that never seem to panic. Some stars near the north appear to circle without setting, and that idea, something that doesn't fall, something that keeps its place, fit perfectly with the dream of eternity. You walk closer until the pyramid's shadow starts to swallow starlight. The temperature drops a little, like you've stepped into the shade of something ancient and unbothered. The edges of the pyramid soften in the darkness. Hard geometry becomes a quiet mass. It's easier to understand why these shapes feel soothing. They're decisive. They don't wobble. They don't apologize. They just sit there, insisting that permanence is possible. And there's a gentle, everyday symbolism woven into the location. Many pyramids were built on the west side of the Nile, where the sun goes down. West is evening. West is the day folding itself away. When you watch the sun set, it doesn't look like the world is breaking. It looks like the world is closing its eyes. The Old Kingdom leaned into that. Death wasn't imagined as a sudden and so much as a transition with a familiar rhythm. Sunset followed by sunrise, rest followed by return. Even the horizon matters. That bright line where sky meets earth, where the sun appears and disappears, becomes a kind of doorway in the imagination. Standing here, with the desert spread out and the sky huge, the idea makes emotional sense without you needing a lecture. The universe feels wide enough to contain a passage you can't see. Touch the stone. It's cooler than you expect. Limestone holds the day's heat and then releases it slowly, turning night into a gentle exchange. Under your fingers, the surface is grainy, slightly rough, with tiny textures like the memory of shells. Because that's what it is. Long before Pharaohs, this land was underwater. The pyramids are made from ancient seabed, ocean history stacked into a staircase of rock. A tomb built from the fossils of a vanished sea, shaped to point at the stars. It's quietly poetic and also a reminder that time has always been doing this, compressing, layering, turning living worlds into stone. Imagine the pyramids when they were new. Many had smooth, casing stones fitted so tightly that the faces could shine, especially in early light. A pale triangle on the horizon, catching sun and throwing it back. Less spooky tomb, more gleaming landmark. You can picture a traveler far away, seeing that bright shape and feeling the same thing you're feeling. The sense that someone, somewhere, has decided the world can be measured and made orderly. That order begins with the Nile. You can't see it clearly from here, but you can feel its presence in the way Egypt exists at all. A green ribbon cutting through a vast beige world. The river floods, retreats, returns, steady as breathing. It brings silt, crops, predictability. The kind of predictability that lets a society do something wildly impractical, like spending years shaping stone for a single person's afterlife. And here's the relaxing twist. Much of that work fit into the river's rhythm. When the fields were underwater and farming paused, labor could shift. The pyramid doesn't rise from constant chaos. It rises from seasonal timing, from waiting, from communities coordinating their effort when nature created a gap in the calendar. The greatest stone monuments on Earth are, in a strange way, built out of patience. With every step, the old kingdom fills in around you, not as a noisy crowd, but as a quiet network. Surveyors stretching cords and sighting along lines. Scribes tracking rations and names, turning human muscle into neat records. Bakers and brewers keeping energy simple and steady. Boatmen moving stone when the water is high enough to carry it. Craftsmen shaping blocks with the kind of repetitive skill that becomes meditative when it's done well. And at the center, the pharaoh, a human being with sand as sandals and an ego the size of a small mountain. And also a symbol people depended on to keep the universe from wobbling. It's a lot to ask of one person, but it's also a kind of comfort for everyone else. Complicated world? Put the cosmic responsibility on the crown guy. Everyone else focuses on bread, beer, stone, and stars. Names matter here. A pharaoh wanted his name to last, carved into materials that outlive bodies. Stone isn't only strong, it's legible. If the name stays readable, the person stays present in memory. It's the old kingdom's version of refusing to vanish. A monument isn't only a structure. It's a promise that someone will still be spoken of when the rest of the day has gone quiet. Standing in the pyramid's shadow, that promise doesn't feel loud. It feels steady. The mystery isn't a sudden riddle. It's a slow question that stays gentle in your mind. How do they trust this so completely? This idea that a shape could carry meaning across millennia. The answer seems to be everywhere you look. In the stars that keep their patterns, in the river that keeps its schedule, in the desert that keeps its silence, in the stone that keeps its cool. The pyramid holds all of it, sky, river, labor, belief, pulled into a single simple form. A triangle, somehow big enough to contain a whole civilization's confidence. You stand there a moment longer, breathing in dry air and starlight, feeling the night widen around you, and the old kingdom begins to speak the way the desert speaks, not with volume, with presence. The pyramid's shadow stays behind you as you ease down from the stony plateau toward the darker band of land where Egypt actually breathes. The desert is all open silence, but the valley has texture, soft, layered, alive. From up here, the Nile corridor looks like a long brushstroke of deep green laid across sand, almost too clean to be real, like someone drew it with intention. As you get closer, the air changes. There's a faint sweetness to it, not perfume sweet, more like damp soil after heat. The breeze carries hints of reeds and mud and something vegetal, like crushed leaves. A river doesn't just bring water, it brings a mood. The desert makes you feel small in a cosmic way. The Nile makes you feel small in a practical way, like you've wandered into a system that has been running smoothly long before you arrived and will keep running when you're gone. That's the secret engine beneath the old kingdom's grandeur. Not drama, not constant conquest, but rhythm. Reliable, boring in the best way rhythm. The kind of predictability that turns survival into planning, and planning into projects that look impossible from the outside. You can picture the year not as months on a modern calendar, but as a repeating story told by the river. The flood season comes, and the water spreads out over the fields like a slow, deliberate blanket. It's not a disaster in this world. It's a delivery. The river arrives carrying dark silt, the fine, rich stuff that makes plants behave like they've been given a pep talk. When the water pulls back, it leaves behind a renewed layer of fertility, a quiet reset button pressed by nature itself. And because that flood comes again and again, people stop living in pure reaction mode. They can predict. They can coordinate. They can build a civilization that feels like it's resting on a metronome. You walk along the edge of cultivated land, where the ground underfoot changes from sand to packed earth, softer, slightly springy. The fields are arranged with a calm logic, plots separated by channels, paths worn smooth by feet that have walked them for generations. In the distance, palms stand with that relaxed confidence of plants that always know where their next drink is coming from. Somewhere nearby, a farmer is doing what farmers do everywhere, checking water, checking soil, checking the sky, and pretending he isn't checking his neighbor's fields for comparison. The tools are simple: wooden handles, stone or copper edges, baskets, ropes. The work is repetitive, and repetition is the point. A stable food supply doesn't appear through excitement. It appears through the same motions done at the same times, year after year, until the body learns them like a lullaby. The river also teaches the country how to count. When your livelihood depends on water levels and timing, you watch patterns closely. You mark days. You notice the way the light changes, the way certain stars rise at certain times. The year becomes measurable, and once time feels measurable, big plans feel less terrifying. You can spread effort across seasons. You can store grain. You can promise rations for months ahead. You can look at a limestone plateau and think, with a straight face, that a mountain-shaped tomb is an achievable idea. That's how divine ambition becomes something mundane enough to manage. People love to imagine a pharaoh snapping his fingers and pyramids appearing out of pure ego. The reality is calmer and, honestly, more impressive administration. Scribes, schedules, quotas, inventories. The old kingdom doesn't float on magic. It floats on record-keeping. A kingdom held together by ink and routine, with a crown sitting on top like a decorative paperweight. You drift through a village scene where life runs on small rituals. Morning begins early because the sun doesn't negotiate. You smell bread being baked thick, hearty loaves that feel more like food than art. You catch the tang of beer, not the modern party kind, but the nourishing, everyday kind that's basically bread you could drink. People move with purpose, but not panic. A child runs past, barefoot, a small comet of energy. A dog watches with the judgmental patience of a creature that knows humans will do anything except lie down and nap. There's an ease to the social structure here, at least on the surface. Everyone has a place in the system, and the system has a place in the cosmos. That's the story, Anyway, the pharaoh is tied to the idea of order. Order in the sky, order in the river, order in society. When floods behave, crops grow, and the kingdom stays fed, that isn't just luck. It's framed as evidence that the cosmic arrangement is intact. The universe is balanced. The crown is doing its job. It's a comforting thought, even if it comes with pressure. If you're a person in this world, it's soothing to believe that your environment is predictable because someone sacred is maintaining it. And the ceremonies themselves are rhythmic. Daily rituals in temples happen with precision. Washing, anointing, offering food, and incense, speaking words that are meant to keep the link between worlds strong. The gods receive attention like clockwork. The pharaoh's presence is reinforced through symbols, names, standards, images. Even if you never meet him, you live inside a reality built around him. You catch the smell of incense, resinous and warm, like pine turned into smoke. Somewhere, a priest is going through motions practiced so many times they become almost soothing to watch. There's a strange comfort in repetitive, sacred routine. It's the human equivalent of the river flooding on schedule, a belief made physical through habit. At the same time, the kingdom is full of small luxuries that come from stability. Linen woven and washed until it feels clean against the skin. Oil rubbed into hands after work. Simple jewelry. Painted pottery. Stories told in the evenings. Voices low, laughter quick and soft. When food isn't constantly uncertain, people can spend energy on beauty, on craft, on the small details that make life feel like more than survival. And all of that, quietly, underwrites the pharaoh's biggest promise, permanence. The pyramid isn't only a tomb. It's a public declaration that the center holds, that the state is stable enough to invest in eternity. Every basket of grain measured, every canal cleared, every day recorded by a scribe. Those aren't separate from the pyramid. They're the pyramid's invisible foundation. You look back toward the plateau, where the pyramid's outline still sits against the sky like a dark triangle cut from night. From here, it's easier to see it not as an isolated wonder, but as the end point of a long chain of ordinary actions. The flood comes, the fields grow, the grain stores, the state organizes. The belief system frames it all as cosmic order. Then stone rises, not in a frenzy, but in a slow, disciplined confidence. Even the pace of the river teaches the kingdom how to think about time. Water doesn't sprint, it persists. It returns. It reshapes landscapes by repeating itself. The old kingdom borrows that mindset. A pyramid doesn't have to be finished tomorrow. It has to be finished eventually. And eventually is a word that feels safe when your world is ruled by cycles. Your steps follow a path along the river's edge, and the sound of water stays beside you like a steady companion. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't change mood abruptly. It just continues smooth and consistent, the kind of background sound a tired mind naturally trusts. The night deepens, and the valley seems to breathe more slowly. Lights are scarce, but you can sense homes tucked into the dark, the quiet intimacy of people sleeping, the soft confidence that morning will come and the river will still be there. Somewhere out beyond the fields, the pyramid holds its place, and between river and stone, the old kingdom's calm logic wraps around you. Predictable nature, predictable labor, predictable ritual, and a king who turns that predictability into something that can touch the stars. The river's sound fades behind you the farther you drift, replaced by that familiar desert hush, like the world is holding a finger to its lips. The green ribbon of the valley becomes a dark suggestion, and the plateau returns to being what it always was: open, dry, patient, and slightly judgmental about how loudly humans like to exist. Even in the dimness, you can feel how deliberate the old kingdom was about choosing where to place its dead. Life clusters by water, but eternity gets the high ground. The living need fields, shade, and fresh mud for bricks. The dead get rock. The living build with what's quick and convenient. The pharaoh builds with what refuses to rot. At first, That difference wasn't a perfect triangle on the horizon. It was simpler, lower, squarer. The earliest royal tombs didn't announce themselves as mountains. They sat like solid benches of earth and stone. Mastabas, wide rectangular structures with sloping sides, like someone took a basic box and gave it a little dignity. From above, they'd look calm and orderly, and from ground level, they'd feel like a stubborn promise. This place is not going anywhere. Mastabas had an almost soothing logic, a visible structure above ground, and beneath it, a deep burial chamber tucked away like a secret you can't stop thinking about. A shaft going down, then a chamber cut into rock, then everything sealed and guarded by weight and depth. The idea is simple. The body goes below, safe from heat, animals, and anyone curious enough to borrow royal jewelry. Above, there's a place for offerings and remembrance, a point where the living can keep sending attention and food and words into the closed world under the ground. It's practical, and then it becomes symbolic without even trying. Above-ground presence and below-ground permanence. A building you can point to and a chamber you can't casually visit. The Old Kingdom loved this combination. Visibility for prestige, hidden depth for protection. It's like the architecture is doing the same thing your mind does when you fall asleep. Outer calm, inner mysteries. You walk along the edge of an ancient cemetery zone, the desert floor subtly changing where human planning once pressed into it. Even when structures have crumbled, the intention remains, as if the sand can't forget where people tried to anchor eternity. You can picture lines of mastabas belonging to nobles and officials, each one wanting to be close to royal power, even in death. That's one of those facts that feels both ancient and extremely modern. Even the afterlife has real estate trends. Royal tomb building starts as tradition, then turns into competition, then becomes something like an engineering obsession. And the most relaxing part is how clearly you can sense the learning curve. There's no instant perfection here. There's trial. There's ambition that overshoots. There are solutions that look elegant until gravity has opinions. You can almost hear a builder somewhere in the past confidently declaring something will definitely hold, which is the first sign it won't. Stone is patient, but it's not forgiving. It remembers every mistake. The big turn comes at Saqqara, where the desert rises in gentle steps away from the valley. The place has a quiet gravity, and not only the physical kind. This is where one king decides a mastaba isn't enough. Not because his soul demanded it in a dramatic speech, but because the Old Kingdom is starting to think larger, more vertically, more skyward. The idea of stacking permanence becomes irresistible. That king is Djoser. You don't have to meet him. You can feel him in the architecture like a signature. His monument isn't a smooth pyramid yet. It's a step pyramid, layers stacked upward like a stone staircase, meant for a god who doesn't get tired. It looks less like a mountain and more like a deliberate climb, as if the building is saying, very calmly, that it intends to connect earth to sky in a measurable way. And behind that shift is a name that lingers like a quiet spark. Imhotep. Official. Planner. Builder. The kind of person every large project secretly depends on. Kings get the glory, but the person who understands stone and space gets the real power. You can picture him not as a wizard, not as a miracle worker, but as an unshakable professional with a mind that sees structure the way the river sees its path. Clear, inevitable, patient. The step pyramid isn't just a new shape, it's a new material statement. Earlier monumental construction often leaned on mud brick because mud brick is easy and local and cooperative. It's also, unfortunately, mud. You can plaster it, paint it, love it, and it will still melt back into the landscape if the centuries press hard enough. Stone is a different kind of promise. Stone is what you choose when you want a name to echo. So Djoser's complex doesn't stop at a single big structure. It becomes a whole planned world. Courtyards, ceremonial spaces, walls, shrines, an entire afterlife campus. Because apparently the king's eternity needs multiple rooms and a nice walkway. It's strangely relatable. People can't even pack for a weekend without overthinking it. And here's an ancient king commissioning a full-scale spiritual infrastructure. The perimeter wall itself is part of the message. It draws a boundary between ordinary space and sacred space, between the living world and the controlled, curated world built for a royal spirit. Inside, the layout feels intentional, almost like choreography. Spaces for rituals, places for symbolic runs, areas meant to reenact and reinforce kingship. The building isn't only a container for a body, it's a stage set for eternal authority. And it's all designed with that old kingdom obsession with order. Straight lines, repeated forms, measured distances, the kind of planning that feels calming because it reduces chaos into geometry. Even if you don't share the belief system, you can understand the emotional appeal. Build a world that stays still. The step pyramid itself likely began as a mastaba and then grew, expanded, stacked, made taller in phases like ambition that keeps revising its own draft. That's the part that feels so human. Monumental confidence with a bit of weight. What if we add another layer? It's the ancient equivalent of editing your caption 15 times and then deciding it was fine the first time. Except their edits weigh thousands of tons. Walking through the imagined courtyards, you can sense the subtle tension between ceremonial beauty and engineering necessity. Stone buildings don't just stand because you want them to. They stand because weight is directed properly. The step form helps distribute load. It's a pragmatic answer dressed up as spiritual symbolism. Steps aren't only a ladder to the heavens. They're also a way to keep massive stone stable without asking it to behave like magic. Still, the step pyramid is not the final form. It's a bold middle step, a statement that the Old Kingdom is learning how to shape eternity. Early builders explore, test, and refine, and you can feel the era's experimentation in the way later monuments will smooth out. But here at this early stage, there's a delicious sense of possibility. Like the civilization is standing at the edge of a new idea and leaning forward. The more you linger, the more the cemetery landscape feels like a laboratory. Every tomb is a hypothesis about what lasts. Mud brick with stone reinforcements. Stone with careful joints. Different angles. Different layouts. The dead don't complain, so the living get to iterate. There's also the question of protection. You can picture the anxiety behind the grandeur. If you believe the body and the name matter for eternity, then you worry about anything that might interrupt that. The tomb becomes a puzzle box. Shafts, sealed passages, false doors, hidden chambers. Not because ancient Egyptians were obsessed with traps in the movie sense, though humans do love drama, but because they were obsessed with control. Control over space. Control over access. Control over the boundary between this world and the next. The false door concept is especially soothing in its weirdness. A carved doorway that doesn't open physically, but opens symbolically, a point where the spirit can pass, where offerings can be received. It's an architectural compromise between this needs to be sealed forever and the dead still want snacks. The afterlife, in this worldview, is not ethereal and vague. It's logistical. It needs entry points, delivery systems, routines. You can almost see a priest placing bread and beer, murmuring words, trusting that the ritual turns ordinary food into something the spirit can use. That bread and beer economy again, just stretched beyond death. And Saqqara's monumentality broadcasts another message. The king's eternity is a public project, not private grief, not hidden mourning, state-sponsored permanence. People working together, not only because they're told to, but because the entire system of order depends on the king's continued cosmic role. The pyramid complex is a national reassurance made of stone. When it stands, it says the center holds. The mystery that stays with you here isn't only how did they build it, though that question hums in the background like the river's steady flow. The deeper mystery is emotional. Why does a shape feel like a solution? Why does stacking stone calm the fear of impermanence? You can stand among these ruins and feel the answer in your body, because stone doesn't flinch, Because geometry doesn't age the way flesh does. Because a wall doesn't forget your name if you carve it deep enough. Yet, even this confidence contains risk. Build bigger, and the consequences of error become bigger too. If a mastaba cracks, it's a repair. If a towering structure shifts or collapses, it's a catastrophe, political, spiritual, and very personal for the king whose eternity is suddenly looking a little compromised. You can sense the builders learning to respect stress and weight, to read stone like a language, to understand which blocks behave and which blocks betray. Every new course of stone is both progress and a question posed to gravity. And gravity, as always, responds in the same calm tone. Show me your math. You wander past the imagined boundary wall again, feeling the way sacred architecture shapes the mind. Inside the walls, the space feels controlled and intentional. Outside, the desert opens up and becomes infinite. That contrast is part of the magic. The complex is a bubble of order inside an ocean of sand, a small universe built to outlast the bigger one. The step pyramid rises in your mind's eye, layered and deliberate, and you can feel the moment when the old kingdom realizes it can do this. Not only bury kings, but design eternity. Not only stack brick, but choreograph stone. The pyramid age doesn't appear like lightning. It gathers like dawn, quiet at first, then undeniable. And as you keep walking, the desert night holds everything in a calm grip. The river's rhythm behind you, the village's bread smell memory fading, the scratch of a scribe's pen echoing in your imagination. And here, at Saqqara, the first truly massive stone idea taking shape, patient and confident, as if it has always been waiting for humans to learn how to think in triangles. The step pyramid's layered silhouette stays in your mind like a steady heartbeat, but the old kingdom doesn't stay satisfied with steps for long. A staircase is honest about the work it took to rise. Smooth sides are a different kind of confidence. Confidence bordering on arrogance, the kind that makes gravity clear its throat and ask for your credentials. The desert path pulls you south, away from Saqqara's experimental calm, and toward a place where the sand feels slightly more open, the horizon longer and cleaner. The air has that same dry clarity, but the mood shifts. Saqqara feels like invention in progress. What waits ahead feels like a ruler sliding across papyrus, measured, committed, and quietly competitive. A name begins to press itself into the night. Sneferu. He's the kind of pharaoh who makes historians nod slowly, because his reign reads like someone binge-watching the How to Build a Pyramid tutorial series and deciding to actually do the homework. One pyramid? Goo. Sneferu treats pyramids like giraffes, like prototypes, like he's willing to fail in public, which is impressive when the public is an entire kingdom and the failure weighs millions of kilograms. The calmest fact about him is that perfection doesn't appear in his hands all at once. It arrives through repetition, through stubbornness, through a willingness to build, watch, adjust, and build again. His story is basically, okay, that didn't work anyway. The first big stop is Midam. The desert here has a quiet emptiness that makes structures look even more dramatic, like they're posing for the moon. What remains is strange, almost like a tower with broken shoulders, a core that looks too steep and too exposed. People call it a collapsed pyramid, and it has that vibe, a monument that lost its outer calm. Midam likely began life as a step pyramid, because steps were the comfortable language of the time, then got edited into a smooth-sided shape by filling in the steps with additional stone. The idea is elegant. Take the staircase and turn it into a slope. Turn climb into glide. Turn visible layers into a single skin of geometry. It sounds simple until you remember that stone is heavy, and heavy things become very honest when their foundation is even slightly optimistic. The outer layers at Midam didn't stay politely in place. Whether it happened during construction, soon after, or later through long centuries of stone robbing and erosion, the effect is the same, a structure that reveals its bones. The smooth dream peeled away, leaving a more naked truth beneath. And honestly, it's soothing to see a civilization admit, through the evidence of physics, that the first attempt at greatness can be messy. You can stand in the presence of Midam's remnants and feel the learning. Feel the moment someone realized the method needed refinement. Not because the gods changed their minds, but because stone refused to cooperate with wishful thinking. The important thing is Sneferu didn't stop. He didn't look at Midam and decide pyramids were overrated. He looked at Midam and decided the engineering needed to grow up. That decision leads to Dashur, a quieter stretch of desert where two pyramids sit like a pair of thoughts, one mid-correction, one resolved. The first one at Dashur is the Bent Pyramid, and it's one of the most unintentionally relatable monuments ever built. Halfway up, the angle changes, like the pyramid suddenly remembered an appointment and adjusted its posture. From the ground, it's beautiful in a way that feels alive. The lower section rises steeply, bold and impatient. Then the slope relaxes, as if the pyramid took a deep breath and said, "All right, no need to rush eternity." That bend isn't decorative. It's a problem-solving move carved into the horizon. The early builders started with a steep angle, the kind that looks impressive and reaches skyward quickly. It also creates heavier sideways pressure inside the structure. Stress that pushes outward, stress that can crack, stress that makes internal chambers complain in stone language. Somewhere during construction, they likely noticed cracks and instability, the kind of warning signs that make even the most confident supervisor suddenly become very interested in safety considerations. So the angle shifts to something gentler, less dramatic, more stable. The pyramid keeps growing, just with a calmer slope, like a project manager who finally convinced everyone to stop promising impossible deadlines. It's a quiet victory. The Bent Pyramid is the old kingdom choosing to correct course rather than pretend the laws of physics are optional. It's humility built into architecture, humility that still manages to look majestic. And the Bent Pyramid holds another soft miracle. Much of its outer casing survives. Smooth limestone blocks still cling to parts of its surface, catching moonlight in a way that makes you understand what New Pyramid must have looked like. Not a rough mountain of blocks, but a bright, polished plain fitted with such precision that seems nearly disappear. Touching those casing stones in your imagination, you can almost feel the obsession with fit. Blocks placed so carefully that the pyramid becomes less a pile and more a single object, like it was poured into shape. That level of precision doesn't happen by accident. It happens when a culture respects measurement like it's sacred. Inside, the Bent Pyramid also has its own quirks. Passages slope downward. Chambers rise with core-belled ceilings, stone layers stepping inward as they go up, a method that spreads weight and reduces collapse risk. It's the same logic as a step pyramid, hidden inside a smooth shell. The Old Kingdom never really abandoned steps. It just learns where to conceal them. That internal architecture is one of those calming facts that doesn't get enough love. These pyramids aren't hollow shells. They're carefully planned pressure puzzles. Every corridor angle, every chamber shape, every ceiling technique is a conversation with weight. The builders are negotiating with gravity the way farmers negotiate with water, through observation, repetition, and slightly anxious respect. Standing beneath the Bent Pyramid shadow, it becomes obvious how much engineering is really a form of listening. Stone speaks slowly, but it does speak. A crack is a sentence. A settling shift is a warning. An intact ceiling is applause. And then, not far away, the red pyramid waits with a different energy. It's smoother, more confident, more complete. Its sides rise at a consistent, gentler angle, like the Bent Pyramid's corrected half decided to become the whole personality. This is where the dream of the true, smooth-sided pyramid lands properly for the first time. The limestone here has a warm tone, especially in certain light, because of natural iron content giving it a reddish tint. Under moonlight, it's subtler, more like a quiet blush than a bold color, but the name sticks. Red Pyramid. A pyramid that sounds dramatic and then turns out to be oddly calming in person, like someone with an intimidating title who turns out to make great tea. Walking around it, the shape feels final. The base sits with authority. The slope feels stable. The peak seems less like an argument with the sky and more like a handshake. The structure doesn't need to bend because the lesson has already been learned. The angle is chosen for survival, not swagger. And that's Sneferu's real gift to the Pyramid Age, the shift from experimentation into repeatable success. Midam shows the risk of forcing the dream too fast. The bent pyramid shows the courage to correct midstream. The red pyramid shows the calm of a solution that works. Picture the building site in that era. Not chaos, but controlled movement. Quarrying limestone, cutting blocks, dragging them on sleds, organizing crews, coordinating deliveries. The human soundscape would have been rhythmic, tools tapping, men calling, ropes creaking, a steady tempo of effort. The desert would have listened the way it always listens, taking in the noise and holding it without judgment. The more you think about it, the more soothing Sneferu's story becomes. It's progress without panic. A king with enough authority to demand the impossible, and enough practicality to accept that the impossible takes practice. There's a gentle sarcasm hiding in it too, because imagine being the person who had to tell the pharaoh his pyramid was cracking. That's not a casual conversation. That's a good news. We noticed this before it got worse conversation, delivered with the kind of careful politeness that comes from wanting to keep your head attached to your body. Yet the correction happens. The project continues. The pyramid survives. That suggests something important about the old kingdom at its peak. It could absorb mistakes and still function. It had enough surplus, enough organizational strength, enough institutional memory to pivot. A society held together by routine doesn't just build, it adapts. The adaptation shows up in details people rarely linger on. Better foundations, better planning of internal chambers, better distribution of weight, better decisions about slope. The choice of where to quarry, how to transport, how to fit casing stones so tightly that wind and sand struggle to find gaps. Every improvement is a quiet step toward the ultimate monument that will follow. Even Sneferu's name carries a kind of soft humor when you realize he probably built more pyramids than anyone else in that early phase, like he was collecting them. Midam, Dasher again. The Pyramid Age isn't a single lightning strike. It's a series of measured attempts, each one teaching the next. If eternity is the goal, taking a few tries is almost logical. And there's something tender about that, too. In a world obsessed with permanence, the path to permanence is imperfect. The stones show scars of learning. The angles show decisions made under pressure. The monuments carry the story of human adjustment, a civilization reaching for the heavens and occasionally having to compromise with reality. The red pyramid's steady slopes hold your gaze for a long time. It feels like the old kingdom has found the tone it wanted all along. Quiet magnificence, not frantic display. A shape that doesn't need to explain itself. A presence that makes the desert feel even quieter by contrast. Somewhere in the distance, beyond this calm mastery, the future is gathering. A son will inherit these lessons. A larger plateau waits. A more famous pyramid will rise with an even tighter discipline. Sneferu's legacy isn't only stone. It's confidence earned the hard way, passed forward like a secret that becomes obvious once you know where to look. The red pyramid stays behind you like a solved equation, its calm slope lingering in the corner of your mind the way a good idea keeps replaying itself. The desert between Dasher and the next great plateau feels wider than it should, as if the land is giving history a long inhale before the biggest exhale of stone Egypt will ever make. The horizon ahead changes. The air is the same dry clarity, but the ground starts to feel more purposeful under your feet, less like raw wilderness, more like a stage being prepared. And then the plateau rises and the night seems to sharpen around it, because some shapes don't simply appear on the skyline. They arrive. Giza. Even from far away, the Great Pyramid doesn't look like a building. It looks like the idea of a building that refused to compromise. A dark triangle set against the stars, steady enough to make the constellations feel slightly uncertain, like they're the ones that might wander off if they're not careful. The nearer you get, the more your sense of scale quietly breaks. Your brain keeps trying to file it under a large structure, and the pyramid keeps replying, calmly, try again. This is Khufu's project, and Khufu himself is almost less visible than his monument. That's one of the odd, soothing truths of the Old Kingdom. The king can be a semi-divine headline, yet the thing that makes his dream real is an ocean of ordinary coordination. He is the center of the story, but the story runs on systems. You step onto the Giza Plateau, and the night wind feels different here, cleaner, higher, less scented by fields. The limestone underfoot is pale in the moonlight, and it crunches softly where sand collects in shallow dips. Out on the edge of the plateau, the valley glimmers faintly, and beyond that, the river's dark ribbon is there, patient and essential. It's easy to picture how this place was chosen. High ground for permanence, close enough to the Nile for supply and movement, far enough from the flood to keep the foundation dry and stubborn. The Great Pyramid's base stretches out like a calm, wide claim. Standing near it, you don't just see it, you feel it the way you feel the presence of a cliff. The stone face rises at an angle that seems to hold the sky up by sheer confidence. If the Red Pyramid was a lesson learned, this is the lesson put on display with perfect posture. And the strangest part is how quiet it all is now. No shouting, no hauling, no dust clouds of work. Just a sleeping monument and the soft hiss of desert wind. That silence makes the original noise feel even more unreal. Because to build this, the Old Kingdom had to become a machine that could feed itself while doing something absurd. Not chaotic, not frantic, controlled. Khufu's pyramid is often talked about like a miracle, and it is, but the miracle isn't supernatural. It's administrative. It's what happens when a state gets very good at predictable routines and decides to aim that predictability at stone. You can sense the bureaucracy in the way the site feels planned. The plateau isn't random here. It's organized space. There's a logic to where things sit, how they connect, how pathways would have run. A causeway linking the pyramid complex to the lower, river-adjacent parts of the world. Areas that once held activity, storage, preparation. A landscape arranged for movement, because you don't move millions of heavy blocks by hoping really hard. Think about what it takes just to keep people working calmly for years. Food arriving on schedule, water, tools, rope, timber, stone cutting equipment, replacement parts, medical care when someone pulls something that really did not need to be pulled that hard. Someone has to track all of that. Someone has to count. Someone has to notice when deliveries slip and adjust. Someone has to do the unglamorous work of making sure tomorrow actually functions. The Old Kingdom had scribes for that. People whose power came from making marks that the kingdom obeyed. A pyramid doesn't rise because someone is strong. It rises because someone knows how to distribute strength over time without exhausting the system. And the Great Pyramid feels like distributed effort made visible. You walk along the base, and the stones near ground level are immense, each one a thick, heavy statement. Their surfaces are weathered now, but you can still read the intention in the fit. This wasn't a casual stack. Even without the original smooth casing that once made it gleam, the core masonry shows that someone cared about level courses, about stability, about alignment. It's the physical version of a calm voice saying, measure twice. Place once. Don't get creative with gravity. Khufu's era sits at the height of Old Kingdom confidence, when the idea of kingship is fused with cosmic order so tightly it's hard to separate political authority from the way the sun rises. The pharaoh isn't only a ruler, he's a guarantee. His continued existence, his eternal existence, is a reassurance that the universe's rules still apply. When your society believes that, Investing enormous resources into a king's afterlife doesn't feel like waste. It feels like maintenance, like repairing a roof before the rainy season, except the rainy season is metaphysical anxiety and the roof is a mountain of stone. And the Giza Plateau, under moonlight, makes that belief feel almost reasonable. The stars above are steady. The horizon is clear. The pyramid points upward like a finger that never trembles. If you're going to convince yourself that the world has an orderly spine, this is the place you do it. You can imagine Khufu's court in a quieter, more human way than the usual myth. Not just incense and golden thrones, but meetings. Yes, meetings. The kind where someone says timeline, and another person says resources, and everyone pretends the schedule isn't completely insane. The sort of polite, tense conversation where you can't openly admit a problem because the problem is the king's dream. So you learn to phrase it as an opportunity. We have an opportunity to improve the angle of our transport efficiency. Translation: we're tired and the stones are heavy. There's gentle sarcasm in that thought, but it's also the truth of how large projects work in any era. The language changes. The human dynamic doesn't. The pyramid's internal world adds another layer of quiet awe, even if you're only walking its exterior tonight. Because inside this massive solid, there are corridors and chambers placed with intent. This isn't a hollow monument with a coffin tossed in as an afterthought. It's a designed interior, a planned sequence of spaces. A descent, a rise, a shaping of movement through stone that feels almost like choreography. The so-called Grand Gallery, for example, is a steep, tall passage that feels like the inside of a stone instrument. Long lines converging upward, walls stepping in with a rhythm that looks both aesthetic and structural. It's easy to picture lamplight moving there, a warm flicker against pale rock. It must have felt unreal even then, like walking inside a decision. Above, the king's chamber sits with its heavy granite presence, and above that, relieving spaces that help distribute weight. Practical solutions hidden in sacred architecture. Those features are the Old Kingdom in a nutshell. Spiritual ambition backed by calm engineering. Not magic. Management. And management isn't only about the inside. It's also about the surrounding landscape. This pyramid wasn't alone. It belonged to a whole complex. Temples, causeways, subsidiary structures. Boat pits nearby that once held disassembled vessels. Because the Pharaoh's eternity wasn't imagined as sitting still forever. It was imagined as moving, traveling, participating in cosmic cycles. The afterlife had transportation planning. Of course it did. Eternity is long. You don't want to be stuck without options. Even the stone itself hints at organization. Limestone from nearby quarries, granite hauled from far to the south for specific chambers, materials chosen for different purposes, strength here, shine there, ritual meaning everywhere. The fact that different stones were selected and moved for different roles tells you this wasn't one giant act of brute force. It was a layered strategy, a supply chain with theological flair. You pause and look up along one face of the pyramid. The angle draws your eyes higher until the top fades into darkness, and the stars seem to cluster there like they're curious. The smooth, casing stones that once covered the pyramid would have made this face look like a single plane, reflecting sunlight by day, moonlight by night. When it was new, it may have looked less like a rough mountain and more like a blade of light, something that turned the sun into architecture. That vision is quietly intoxicating. A shining shape on the plateau, visible from the valley, a constant reminder that the king's project is underway. The state is functioning. The cosmos is being maintained. People in fields could glance up and see that bright triangle and feel in their bones that the center still holds. And for Khufu, the pyramid isn't only about being remembered. It's about being placed correctly in the universe. Orientation matters. Relationship to sky matters. Connection to the river matters. The Old Kingdom's calm obsession with order shows up in everything about this site. Even if you don't talk about the specific methods yet, you can feel the seriousness of alignment in the way the pyramid sits like it belongs exactly where it is and nowhere else. A structure like this turns time into a physical experience. It forces your mind to scale up. You start thinking in years instead of days, in generations instead of weekends. The weird comfort of it is that it makes your own life feel lighter. Your worries shrink in the presence of stone that has simply been here, unbothered, through storms and dynasties and the slow rearranging of languages. But the pyramid doesn't feel cold tonight. It feels like organized patience, like thousands of small actions, measuring, hauling, cutting, recording, repeated calmly until they become a mountain. People often look for a single secret trick behind the Great Pyramid, like it's hiding a cheat code. The real secret is that the Old Kingdom was willing to do the same thing correctly again and again for a very long time. You walk along the shadow line where moonlight meets darkness, and it's like walking along the edge of an idea. Behind you, Snefer's practice and correction echo faintly. Midam's lesson, the bent pyramid's humility, the red pyramid's resolution. In front of you, Khufu's project stands as the moment the kingdom says, without raising its voice, "We know what we're doing." And yet, beneath all that confidence, you can still sense the human layer. People who got tired, people who argued, people who made jokes to survive the heat, people who went home to bread and beer and ordinary life after spending the day touching stones that were supposed to last forever. That humanity doesn't shrink the pyramid. It makes it bigger because it means this monument is not only a king's dream. It's a society's discipline made visible. The night wind slides along the pyramid's face, and the sound is faint, like sand brushing linen. The Great Pyramid doesn't need to move. It only needs to remain. It's the quietest kind of power, stillness that outlasts everything noisy. The stillness lingers, but if you listen long enough, the silence starts to feel crowded, like the plateau is full of invisible footsteps that never fully left. Wind slides across stone, sand taps lightly in tiny bursts, and your mind begins to fill in the missing soundtrack. Rope creaking, men calling out in rhythm, a supervisor counting beats the way a drummer keeps a song from falling apart. The Great Pyramid looks like it was always meant to be here, but it wasn't born from a single dramatic command. It was born from people, not a faceless swarm, not a myth of chained bodies, not a movie scene with whips and screaming. Just people who had to eat, sleep, argue, laugh, get blisters, complain about the heat, then show up anyway, because the system expected them to, and because quietly there was pride in doing something that would outlast their grandchildren's grandchildren. The closer you drift to the edges of the pyramid complex, the more the plateau stops feeling like a solitary monument and starts feeling like a place that once had neighborhoods. Not fancy neighborhoods, functional ones. You can picture low structures, storage areas, work yards, baking spaces, places where water jars sat in shade. The pyramid doesn't float, it's anchored in infrastructure. And the people who built it weren't invisible to the Old Kingdom. That's one of the calming things. They were counted, organized, federal rotated, given roles, given names as crews. There's a whole human pulse hidden behind this stone. Think about the basic math of a project like this. It takes time, and time takes calories. Calories take agriculture, storage, and transport. Transport takes administration. Administration takes scribes. Scribes take training and social status. Social status takes a stable culture that values order enough to keep the paperwork sacred. The Great Pyramid is a monument to bureaucracy as much as to belief, and the workers are the living proof that the system could sustain itself while doing something spectacular. You can almost see them as you move through the imagined work camp. Not chained, busy, focused. Some are hauling, some are shaping, some are maintaining tools, some are cooking, some are ferrying water, some are doing the deeply underrated job of keeping everyone else from doing something stupid with a lever. There's a particular kind of teamwork that only forms around heavy things. When the object is too big for any single person to control, cooperation stops being a moral choice and becomes physics. You either pull together or nothing moves. That kind of enforced harmony has its own strange piece to it, like a group breathing exercise, except it's hauling limestone. And the Old Kingdom knew how to make that cooperation repeatable. Crews were organized into teams, and those teams had identities. Not just Worker Group A. People gave their crews nicknames, sometimes surprisingly playful ones, like a sports team name you'd paint on your gear if you could. You can imagine a group calling themselves something like Friends of Khufu, half sincere, half tongue-in-cheek. Because if you're dragging stones for a king who's basically a god on paper, humor becomes a survival tool. A little sarcasm keeps you human. The evidence of those crews isn't only a romantic idea. It shows up in markings left behind. Worker graffiti in hidden spaces, names scribbled where nobody expected tourists to stare at them thousands of years later. The workers didn't vanish without a trace. They signed the job in the quietest, most relatable way, writing on a wall when the boss wasn't looking. Their lives weren't comfortable in a modern sense. This is still hard labor under a blazing sun, with a desert that doesn't care about your feelings. But the picture that emerges is not one of constant brutality. It's one of a state project supported by rations, organization, and a sort of social contract. You give labor, you receive food, beer, and status, because working on the king's monument wasn't only work. It was participation in the center of the world. Food was not an afterthought. You don't keep a workforce steady with vague promises and angry shouting. You keep a workforce steady with bread, beer, and protein. Thick loaves, hearty enough to stick to your ribs. Beer that's less party and more liquid meal. Meat at levels that suggest planning and resources, not random scraps. The kind of diet that says the state understood one of the most ancient truths. Hungry workers don't build wonders. They build resentment. You can picture the bakeries, the rhythm of dough being kneaded, shaped, baked, the smell rising with the morning heat. Bread isn't glamorous, but it's the backbone of calm. A steady supply of bread means your body stops panicking about tomorrow. And when bodies stop panicking, minds cooperate. The Old Kingdom didn't just build pyramids, it built predictability. There would have been water carriers moving constantly, jars balanced carefully, because dehydration turned strong people into liabilities fast. Shade structures would matter. Rest schedules would matter. Even if the work is intense, it can still be managed like a system rather than a punishment. And when people got hurt, and of course they did, the injuries weren't always a death sentence. One of the quietly incredible things about the Giza workforce is the evidence that some injuries were treated and treated well enough that people lived long after. Bones heal in patterns that show time and care. A broken limb that knit back together means someone rested long enough. Someone was fed while not working. Someone was worth healing. That doesn't fit the fantasy of disposable slaves. It fits the reality of a workforce that the state needed to preserve. Even dentistry and medicine existed in ways that feel surprisingly familiar in spirit, if not in technique. People were dealing with aches, infections, were from gritty bread that carried sand from grinding stones. Remedies, bandaging, basic interventions. None of it perfect, but all of it part of the same old kingdom mindset. Maintain order, maintain function, keep the system running. Your steps drift toward where workers would have slept, and the image softens into something almost cozy despite the harshness of the setting. Crowded quarters, certainly. Rough bedding. The night, air cool. The day, heat lingering in stone. Conversations murmured low. Someone telling a story to make the time feel shorter. Someone laughing quietly at a joke that would absolutely get them in trouble if repeated in front of an official. That shared humanity is like a warm layer over the cold monument. And the schedules, those calm, relentless schedules, would have been tuned to the Nile's rhythm, the same river logic that made the entire pyramid age possible. During the flood season, when the fields were underwater and farming paused, more labor could be redirected. That doesn't mean every builder was a part-time pyramid worker, but it does mean the state could expand the labor pool at certain times, pulling in additional hands when agricultural work slackened. The pyramid rises not only from muscle, but from timing. The river makes space in the year. The state fills it with stone. It's tempting to imagine a single, constant army of laborers doing nothing but hauling blocks for decades. The calmer picture is more like rotation. Teams cycle in and out. Specialized workers stay longer, stonecutters, surveyors, experienced builders, while others contribute seasonally or in phases. It's less cinematic, more sustainable. And sustainability is what makes a project of this scale feel possible instead of absurd. You can see the hierarchy without it feeling like pure oppression. There are foremen, scribes, specialists, people who know the craft, people who know the math, people who know how to coax stone into behaving. There are also the laborers who do the heavy hauling. Not everyone has the same job, not everyone has the same comfort, and the Old Kingdom is still a rigid society. But rigid isn't the same as mindless cruelty. A rigid system can still feed you, treat your injuries, record your name, and bury you with a hint of honor if you die in service. And that burial detail matters. There are workers' cemeteries near Giza, simple compared to royal tombs, but present. Real graves for real people who worked at the site. That fact alone changes the emotional temperature. If the workers were purely disposable, their remains would be discarded, forgotten. Instead, there's a sense of community, of recognition, of a society acknowledging that the pyramid wasn't only the king's story. It was also the story of the hands that made it real. This recognition doesn't make the work easy. It makes it meaningful. Meaning is a kind of fuel. It doesn't lift a stone block by itself, but it lifts the spirit enough that the body keeps showing up. The Old Kingdom understood the power of belonging to something bigger than yourself. The pyramid is the biggest, bigger-than-yourself project imaginable. You can almost feel the way pride would spread through a crew when a course of stones was set perfectly level, when a block slid into place and the seams looked clean, when the day's target was met and the supervisor's face relaxed for the first time in hours. Small wins multiplied into a mountain. Even the jokes will be shaped by the work. Someone complaining that the pyramid is almost done in the same way people today say they're almost done with a project that's barely started. Someone claiming their crew is faster than the neighboring crew, absolutely convinced with zero evidence, because confidence is a renewable resource. Someone threatening to name their next child Limestone out of pure spite. And while all of that hums beneath the surface, the pyramid keeps standing there like it doesn't care, like it's already in the future. That contrast, human warmth under an inhuman scale, is part of what makes the story addictive. The monument is cold stone. The process that created it is living texture. As you move along the plateau, the wind catches a faint scent of ash and something bread-like that isn't really here anymore, but your mind insists it can smell it. The Great Pyramid becomes less of a mystery of who built this and more of a calm realization. People built it. Organized people. Fed people. People whose work had structure. Not whips. Wages, rations, rotations, and a culture that treated the king's eternity as a public good. The pyramid's shadow seems softer than before, almost like it's listening back. The monument doesn't speak in words, but it carries the quiet evidence of human systems done well. And that's where the real wonder lives, not only in the stone that remains, but in the ordinary lives that once moved around it like blood around heart. The pride of the crews still hangs in the air like warm bread smell that won't fully leave your clothes. And once you notice that, the next thought arrives on its own. None of that pride matters if the stone never shows up. A pyramid is patient, but it can't build itself out of vibes. Someone had to go get the rock, persuade it to change shape, then convince it to travel across a landscape that is basically one long, dry dare. The desert around Giza feels quiet and empty until you start looking at it like a workplace. Then it turns into a map of supply. The plateau itself is limestone, which means the builders weren't importing everything from some faraway fantasy quarry. A lot of the core stone could be cut right here, close enough that the distance between rock in the ground and rock in the pyramid was measured in sweat rather than months. You picture quarry faces carved into the plateau, shallow cuts widening over time, workers using copper tools where copper could do the job, and switching tactics when copper met its match. Limestone is cooperative compared to harder stone, but it still doesn't just politely separate. It has to be persuaded, scored, wedged, tapped, and eventually convinced to break along a line someone planned. The sound would have been steady and rhythmic. Metal against stone, wooden mallets, the dull crack when a block finally gives up and agrees to become architecture. Then there's the stone that doesn't live conveniently nearby. The really fine white limestone casing that once made pyramids gleam came from across the river at places like Tura, where the limestone is smoother and brighter. It's the good stuff. The company is coming over. Make the house look perfect stone. That choice tells you everything about the mindset. The pyramid isn't only meant to last. It's meant to look like it belongs to the sun. Granite is the other big flex. Hard, heavy, stubborn. The kind of stone you choose when you need strength, and you want everyone to know you chose strength. Granite for key chambers and structural elements means hauling it from far to the south, from quarries around Aswan. That distance is not a cute little road trip. It's a long journey that only makes sense because the Nile exists like a moving highway, carrying heavy things with calm efficiency. And that's the first relaxing truth about the how. Egypt didn't fight the geography. It used it. River transport is quieter than land transport. A boat doesn't complain the way a sled does. When the water is high enough and the channels are planned well, stone can float toward its own destiny, slow and steady, like the river is delivering pieces of a giant puzzle. You can imagine the staging areas near the river. Harbors, ramps up from the water, teams ready to receive shipments. The blocks arrive not as miracles, but as cargo. Someone checks quantities. Someone records it. Someone argues about whether that last load was short by 3 blocks, and the boatman swears he delivered everything, and everybody knows he didn't. But it's too late, and the sun is rude about setting on time. From there, the real intimacy begins, getting stone over land. This is where people love to imagine secret technology, aliens, lost machines. Anything except the boring truth that humans are extremely good at moving heavy objects when they have ropes, leverage, teamwork, and a reason to keep trying. The Old Kingdom didn't need impossible devices. It needed repeatable methods. The kind you can teach a new crew without rewriting the universe. Sledges are the star of that story. Not wheels rolling smoothly down a highway, because sand laughs at wheels. A sledge spreads weight and slides. Wood runners under a load, ropes stretched tight, bodies leaning forward as one. It's almost like a meditation practice that hurts. And then comes one of the most satisfying little details: wet sand. This is the kind of fact that feels like it should be obvious, yet it's still delightful every time. Pour a little water in front of a sledge and the sand firms up. It stops behaving like loose grains that pile into a ridge and start acting more like a supportive surface. Less drag, less wasted effort, more glide. There's even ancient art that matches the idea. Scenes showing people hauling a large statue on a sledge while someone pours liquid in front of it. The image is so practical, it's almost funny. One person's job is basically official sand wetter, which sounds like a role invented by sleep-deprived project managers. But there it is, the smallest action making the hardest parts slightly easier. You can feel why this would be calming to watch. A sledge slides, ropes tighten, feet dig in, bodies move together, and the whole system becomes rhythmic. Pull, step, breathe, pull, step, breathe. The stone moves not because anyone is superhuman, but because the method makes the work steady. Levers are the other quiet hero. A lever is the simplest cheat code physics ever handed humanity, and the Old Kingdom used it with the confidence of people who don't need to show off. A long beam, a fulcrum, a small lift that becomes a big change. Lift a block just enough to slide something under it. Lift again. Adjust. Nudge. Repeat. You never fight the full weight all at once. You negotiate with it in small, polite increments. That style of problem solving is basically the Old Kingdom's personality in tool form. Not flashy. Persistent. A little smug, because once you understand leverage, you can't unsee how much of life is just find the right point to apply pressure. Even stone shaping has that same steady vibe. Dressing blocks so they fit well enough, especially for casing, means careful work. You can picture masons tapping with precision, checking edges, smoothing faces. For harder stone, dolerite pounders come into play. Dark, tough stone used to batter granite patiently into shape. It's not fast. It's stubborn craft. You hit, you check, you hit again, you keep going until the rock agrees. All of this creates a mood that's completely different from the usual mystery of the pyramid's hype. The mystery isn't a sudden trick. It's endurance plus organization. The wow becomes less interesting than the how, because the how is full of small, satisfying solutions that make sense once you see them. Then you start thinking about the climb. Getting stone to the base is one thing. Getting it up the growing pyramid is the part that makes your shoulders ache in sympathy. You don't need to know the exact ramp design to feel the calm logic behind the idea. If you can't lift it straight up, you turn height into distance. You trade steepness for length. You build a path that lets the load rise gradually. Ramps are where certainty fades and imagination has room to stretch, because the evidence isn't a neat instruction manual. Different phases could have used different approaches. Straight ramps, zigzag ramps, ramps that wrap around the structure. Maybe combinations. The Old Kingdom wasn't allergic to changing tactics when needed. Snefru already proved that with his very public angle adjustment, so it's easy to picture them adapting ramp designs as the pyramid grew. A straight ramp from ground to high levels would become enormous, almost absurd in volume. So maybe it worked early and then evolved. A wrapping ramp keeps the structure close, but complicates corners. A zigzag ramp is practical, but demands careful turns. Every option is a compromise, and compromise is the real soundtrack of engineering. What stays consistent is the feeling, motion, slow and controlled, never rushed. A block inches upward. A crew breathes together. Someone calls rhythm like a chant. Someone checks the surface ahead. Someone pours water. Someone wedges a stone behind the load so it can't slide back and ruin everybody's day. The pyramid rises course by course, not as a miracle, but as a long series of okay again. And the crews from earlier, those named teams with their jokes and rivalries, fit perfectly into this. You can picture the bragging rights. One crew claims they set cleaner joints. Another claims they haul faster. A third insists they're the real reason the project is moving and everyone else is just posing. The foreman pretends not to hear because the competition keeps the pace up, and the scribes keep writing because scribes always write, even when the content is basically they did the thing again. The whole process becomes a kind of landscape choreography. Quarry scars on the plateau. Paths worn smoother by sled runners. Staging areas near ramps. Tool yards. Water stations. The pyramid is the center, but the true wonder is the network around it, designed to keep stone flowing without collapsing into chaos. Even the materials of the ramps would have been practical. Mud brick, rubble, chips of limestone, packed earth. Things that can be shaped quickly and repaired often. Temporary structures supporting permanent ones. That contrast is oddly gentle. The Old Kingdom builds eternity on top of things meant to be dismantled. The ramp is like a ladder you don't keep once you've climbed to the roof. By the time a casing stone reaches its place, the work becomes quieter, more delicate. The outer skin has to align, and align beautifully. Those stones would have been fitted with care, their faces smooth so the pyramid could catch light like a single plane. That final step is the shift from heavy labor to finishing craft. The moment the project stops looking like construction and starts looking like a statement. And the statement isn't loud. It's smooth. It's clean. It's controlled. You stand there with the Great Pyramid looming above, and the how keeps unfolding in your mind like a slow, satisfying mechanism. Boats on a river, blocks cut near the site, fine stone shipped from across the water, granite traveling from deep south, sledges sliding over dampened sand, levers nudging weight into obedience, ramps turning height into distance, teams rotating, fed, and organized, doing the same careful motions until the impossible starts behaving like routine. The desert wind brushes across the stone, and it almost feels like the pyramid is less a riddle and more a rhythm, one you can follow without strain, one you can trust. The monument remains enormous, but the process behind it becomes human-sized, step-sized, breath-sized. The more you understand the method, the calmer it gets, because nothing here requires magic. Only patience and the kind of practical intelligence that looks boring right up until it builds a mountain. The rhythm of hauling stays in your muscles even after you stop watching it, like your body learned the tempo just by standing nearby. Pull, step, breathe. Wet sand darkening under a pour jar. The long complaint of rope under tension. Then the block settles, and for a second everything goes quiet. Not because the work is done, but because the next movement is being negotiated. You start to notice how much of this world is negotiation. With stone, with heat, with schedules, with the very human limit of how many times you can do the same hard thing before your patience starts inventing new words for tired. You follow the paths that would have led away from the ramps and toward the place that made all of this possible, the living side of the pyramid. Not the royal temples and ceremonial spaces, but the ordinary buildings that held the ordinary lives. The workers' village doesn't announce itself with a skyline. It sits lower, practical, built to be used, not admired. And it has its own kind of majesty, quiet, unshowy, absolutely essential. The air changes as you approach it. Less pure stone and sand. More smoke from cooking fires, more grain dust, more animals, more people packed close enough that the night holds their warmth. Even in your imagination, you can sense that shift from open desert to lived-in space. The ground feels more compacted, worn down by thousands of feet taking the same routes day after day. The corners of buildings catch moonlight, and shadows stretch between walls like cool ribbons. You step into a narrow lane between mud brick structures. The bricks aren't delicate. They're thick, practical, sun-baked, patched, and repaired when they need to be. The walls hold onto the day's heat and release it slowly at night, turning the village into a gentle radiator. It's almost cozy if you ignore the fact that everyone here spent their daylight hours convincing rocks to climb. A door opening somewhere lets out a moment of sound, murmured voices, a small laugh, the clink of a jar against stone. Then it closes again, and the village returns to a low hush, the way a busy place does when it's trying to rest. The first thing you notice is the smell of food. Not fancy food, working food. Bread that's thick and honest, baked in quantities that make your modern grocery runs look cute. You can imagine a bakery yard where ovens glow like small suns in the early morning, the air heavy with yeast and grain, the kind of smell that makes even a tired body feel slightly more cooperative. Beer is everywhere too, but not the weekend kind. This is everyday beer, the kind you drink because it's calories and hydration and comfort in one. Slightly sour, slightly sweet, cloudy, nourishing. A liquid ration that feels like the Old Kingdom's quiet punchline. The greatest stone monument on Earth, powered by bread you chew and bread you pour. You pass what would have been storage areas, granaries and bins, seal jars, piles of tools, stacks of rope, wood, and anything else that keeps a system running. And you can almost hear the scribes again, not as distant officials, but as part of the village pulse. Their work isn't abstract here. It sits on shelves. It's tied to real deliveries, real names, real mouths that need feeding tomorrow. There's a calm logic to the layout. Not pretty, but efficient. Straightish lanes, functional courtyards, spaces for cooking and processing, places for keeping animals, places for sleeping. It's the same old kingdom instinct you've been feeling everywhere. Turn life into order, turn order into stability and stability into stone. The sleeping quarters are the part that softens the whole story. You picture long, low rooms where men would lie close together, the kind of crowded sleeping that turns individual breathing into a shared background sound. Someone's snore becomes a joke by day. Someone's cough becomes a concern. Someone's quiet humming becomes the thing you miss when they're not there. The bedding is simple. Mats, folded cloth, maybe a wooden headrest that looks uncomfortable until you remember people grow up with these things, and your modern spine isn't the judge of everything. The air is cooler at night, and you can imagine blankets pulled up, shoulders relaxing, bodies finally letting the day go. Not with poetry, with exhaustion. Outside, a few late stragglers move slowly, carrying water jars, checking a door latch, shifting an animal pen gate. The practical things that still need doing even when your arms feel like they're made of stone. There's a tenderness in that. Work doesn't end because it got dark. It ends because the body insists. The village has its own medical corner too, because a workforce that isn't cared for becomes a workforce that breaks. You can imagine a small space where someone skilled looks at injuries with a tired, competent expression. Abrasions from rope, cuts from stone chips, strained backs, swollen joints. They rinse wounds, apply bandages, smear on whatever soothing mixtures they trust. Honey would be a smart choice when you want something that helps a wound behave. Oils too, because dry air and hard work turn skin into a map of cracks. You remember the healed bones you were thinking about earlier, the evidence that people lived long enough for serious injuries to mend. It makes this place feel real in a way that monuments don't always manage. You can't fake healing. Healing takes days and food and rest and someone deciding you're worth it. And those decisions weren't purely emotional. They were practical. Skilled labor is valuable. Experienced haulers know timing and technique. Stonecutters and carpenters and rope makers don't grow on palm trees. A state that wants pyramids has to take care of the bodies that make pyramids possible. That's the warm undercurrent here. The Old Kingdom's grandeur is resting on a surprisingly domestic foundation. Kitchens, clinics, sleeping quarters, people arguing about rations, people trading stories, people washing dust off their hands at night and finding, under the grit, that they're still human. You drift past a courtyard where a cooking fire would have burned earlier, and the stones around it still seem to hold the idea of heat. You imagine pots simmering, stews thickened with grain, onions and garlic for flavor, maybe beans or lentils, maybe fish brought in from the river when supply lines were generous. Dates and figs as small sweet comforts. Salt to replace what the sun steals from the body. It's not luxury, but it's not misery either. It's a ration system with enough care in it to keep morale from collapsing. Animals are part of the picture too, and you can smell them. A faint musk, a warm, living odor that clings to any settlement where meat and milk and labor animals exist. The state's ability to supply protein, whether through cattle or goats or other sources, is another quiet flex. Meat isn't a daily reality for everyone in every era. Here, for this project, it's part of the engine. You don't feed a pyramid with dreams. You feed it with calories that stick. There are small details you start noticing once you stop staring at the pyramid like it's a celebrity. Water jars placed in shade, sand swept out of doorways, tools hung where they can be found in the morning, a stone weight holding down a woven mat against the wind. The kind of tiny, practical choices that make the next day slightly easier. And the village isn't only laborers. It's administrators, foremen, scribes, and specialists, all woven together. The hierarchy is there, as it always is, but it's less like a whip and more like a nervous system. Messages moving, tallies made, decisions passed along. Someone with authority deciding which team gets rotated out, which crew is assigned to hauling, which to stone dressing, which to ramp maintenance, which to the constant, thankless job of keeping paths smooth enough that a sledge doesn't suddenly become everyone's worst memory. You can picture the moment a foreman inspects ropes, because ropes are life here. Rope failure isn't a small inconvenience, it's a disaster. So you check fibers, knots where you replace what's fraying. Someone is always making more. Someone is always patching. The Old Kingdom's miracle is full of people whose entire day is make sure the rope doesn't betray us. Not glamorous, but deeply important. The village also holds the softer social glue, shared identity. Those crew names you imagined earlier, the joking rivalry, the pride in being good at something hard. In the evenings, you can see groups gathering, talking about who set the cleanest joints today, who hauled the heaviest block, who slipped and landed in the sand and claimed it was on purpose. Someone exaggerates a story until it becomes legend by the end of the week. Someone else rolls their eyes because they were there and it wasn't that impressive. A few people laugh anyway because laughter is cheaper than resentment. Somebody brings up a ridiculous home remedy for sunburn, and the group groans because they've heard it before. You file it away for later because the Old Kingdom has a talent for practical weirdness, like the kind of sunscreen you really hope never becomes trendy again. The joke lands, the mood stays light, and the night keeps moving. You look up from a village lane, and the Great Pyramid's outline is there, looming beyond the walls, huge enough to make the buildings feel like toys. The contrast should feel discouraging, but it doesn't. It feels motivating. The pyramid is the mountain you're building, but the village is the proof that the mountain belongs to humans, not to gods alone. You can't have one without the other. The pyramid is the headline. The village is the whole article. The mystery shifts here too. It stops being only how did they move stone and becomes how did they keep a society steady enough to do this? Because the most fragile part of any monument isn't the limestone. It's the people. The fact that this village could function night after night, season after season, means the Old Kingdom wasn't just strong. It was organized in a way that let ordinary life continue under the shadow of an extraordinary goal. And there's something quietly beautiful about that shadow. It falls across bread ovens and sleeping mats, across water jars and bandage cloth, across tired faces that still find the energy to tease each other. The pyramid's mass doesn't crush the village. It shelters it in a strange, psychological way. A reminder that your work is part of something bigger, something that will still be here when your own worries have faded into the sand. You keep walking through the lanes, letting the imagined sounds soften, breathing a last murmur of conversation, a jar being set down carefully so it doesn't crack, the faint shuffle of a guard making a slow loop because someone has to keep watch. Above it all, the plateau holds its quiet, and the pyramid holds its place, and the Old Kingdom keeps revealing itself not as a myth of impossible strength, but as a world where kitchens and clinics and sleeping quarters quietly carried a mountain. The village lanes thin out behind you, and the night air grows cleaner again, as if the desert is politely reclaiming its space. The warmth trapped in mud brick fades with every step, replaced by that cool, dry hush that makes even your thoughts feel quieter. Somewhere inside those sleeping quarters, a crew member rolls over and mutters something that sounds like an argument with a pillow. Somewhere else, a water jar settles with a soft clink. The ordinary side of the pyramid exhales. Out on the open plateau, the Great Pyramid sits in its usual pose, unmoved, unbothered, silently daring the horizon to try something. And right when it feels like the whole landscape is done speaking for the night, you notice movement that doesn't belong to wind or animals. A few figures in the distance. Slow, careful steps. Tools carried with the kind of quiet respect you usually reserve for something fragile. Except what they're carrying is basically string and sticks. This is where the pyramid age gets almost absurdly serious about straight lines. You follow the faint path of their footprints until you're close enough to make out what they're doing. A pair of surveyors, maybe more, standing in a small cluster. A priest nearby, because nothing in the Old Kingdom stays purely technical for long. If a line is important enough, it becomes sacred. If a measurement matters, it becomes a ritual. The universe is supposed to be orderly, and the people in charge of keeping it that way are about to prove it with a rope. There's a ceremony for this, And it has a name that sounds simple and important at the same time: the stretching of the cord. A cord, pulled taut between stakes, becomes a statement. This is where the world will be. This is where the monument begins. This is the first sentence of a story written in stone. And the mood around it is calm, almost reverent, but you can't help noticing the comedy hiding in the background. Imagine dedicating your life to cosmic order, and your most powerful tool is basically a really good piece of string. Your job title might as well be Senior Universe Straightener. The pay is bread and beer. The responsibility is eternity. The cord is held with care, checked and rechecked, because the old kingdom has a deep fear of sloppy beginnings. If the first line is crooked, everything else is just a bigger, more expensive crooked thing. A pyramid doesn't forgive a bad base. A base is the entire personality of the structure. The point at the top gets all the attention, but the base is where the truth lives. You watch them set a stake, then another, then pull the cord until it sings a little under tension. That faint humming is the sound of precision being born. They step back, eyes narrowed, not in anger, more in that focused squint of someone trying to make reality behave. They don't only use the cord, either. They use sighting tools so simple they feel like a prank on modern arrogance. A straight staff, a plumb line hanging down, steady as a promise. A sighting piece that helps the eye hold a line in space. Nothing flashy. Nothing powered, just geometry and patience. And above them, the stars are still awake. That's the part that always gets me, in a sleepy way that makes your brain soften instead of tense up. These surveyors are using the night sky like it's a dependable colleague. They're not guessing north because it feels right. They're finding it because the heavens keep repeating themselves. Certain stars circle the northern sky without setting. And that steady turning gives you reference points that don't care about sandstorms, politics, or the fact that someone's cousin just got promoted for reasons that are absolutely not merit-based. One method involves watching the moment a pair of stars lines up vertically, one above the other, at certain points in their slow rotation. If you mark that line, you can establish a true north-south direction with surprising accuracy. Think about how patient you'd have to be, standing in the dark, staring at 2 points of light, waiting for the exact moment they behave. If your mind wanders, you miss it. If you blink at the wrong time, you swear you didn't blink, and everyone else swears you did. If you're the guy holding the plumb line, and you sneeze, you've basically insulted the cosmos. They do it anyway, night after night, because the old kingdom doesn't treat alignment as decoration. Alignment is theology. North isn't just a direction. It's a concept. The part of the sky that never seems to die, with the circumpolar stars, keeps circling like they've got nowhere better to be. For a king dreaming of eternity, that's the neighborhood you want your monument to point toward. Your eyes drift up to the pyramid again, and the idea clicks deeper. A pyramid isn't only a tomb, it's a pointer. A shape that interacts with light and sky. A stone statement that says very calmly, this is where the king belongs. And that's why the seriousness feels so intense, it becomes almost funny. These people are not casually eyeballing it. They're not doing the ancient version of look straight to me. They're checking, correcting, checking again because the monument isn't allowed to be merely big. It has to be correct. If you could see the Great Pyramid when it was new, smooth, white casing stones, sharp edges, bright faces, it would have looked like it was drawn into the landscape with a ruler. And that impression starts right here, with cords and stakes and sleep-deprived eyes. They measure in cubits, lengths based on the human body, but standardized in a way that turns the body into a unit the whole kingdom can agree on. There's a royal cubit, a measuring rod that keeps everyone honest. You can picture a supervisor guarding it the way people guard important keys. Misplace it and the entire project becomes a comedy of errors that ends with a crooked pyramid and your name being remembered for the wrong reason. Rope stretchers, literally the people whose job is to make ropes behave, become quietly powerful. A rope can sag, stretch, lie. You have to know how to tension it, how to account for slack, how to place it so it doesn't cheat you by a finger width that becomes a disaster across hundreds of feet. And they know. They know because they've done it 1,000 times, and because the Old Kingdom trains its routines until they become instinct. Angles matter too, and here the pyramid becomes a math problem you can feel in your bones. The slope isn't random. It's chosen. It has a ratio, an idea of rise and run, that shapes how the structure distributes weight and how it looks against the sky. It's engineering dressed as aesthetics. A stable angle that also feels inevitable, like the pyramid couldn't have been any other way. You watch a surveyor pace out distances, counting in a low voice, stopping to mark points, stepping back again. The work is slow, unhurried, almost meditative. And the more you watch, the more you realize why this whole topic is strangely relaxing. It's about control without chaos. It's about taking a universe that feels huge and saying, okay, we can still place a line here. We can still align ourselves with something steady. The priest murmurs something, words meant to wrap the measurements in meaning. Because in this world, precision isn't only for stability. It's for maintaining the principle of order itself, that deep Old Kingdom obsession with things being in their proper place. The river floods on schedule. The sun rises. Stars return. Bread bakes. Beer ferments. The king rules. The tomb aligns. The universe behaves. And the people who make it behave are standing in sand at night. Try not to mess up a straight line. There's also the horizon work, using the sun and its shadows to find directions when the stars aren't convenient. A vertical stick, a shadow line, marks made at different times, arcs traced, midpoints found. The technique is simple enough to explain, but the execution demands patience. You're basically reading the sun's handwriting across the ground. The shadow moves like a slow animal, and you have to catch it at the right moments. Then trust your marks more than your instincts. That trust is the whole mood here. Trust in repeatable methods. Trust in careful observation. Trust in the idea that the world has patterns worth following. You glance back toward where the workers sleep, and you feel the contrast. In the village, the human world is warm and messy. Laughter, food, sore muscles. Somebody definitely exaggerating a story about hauling the biggest block, and somebody else calling them out. Out here at the measuring line, the human world gets quiet and precise. The humor becomes subtler. The stakes become cosmic. And still, it's all connected. The same bread and beer economy that powers hauling also powers surveying. The same scribes who tally rations also record measurements. The same state that manages canals also manages geometry. The pyramid rises from that web of routine like a natural result, as if order itself grew a stone shell. The Great Pyramid's orientation is the kind of detail that makes your mind go quiet with respect. It's aligned so closely to the cardinal directions that even modern people stare at it and have to admit, through clenched, skeptical teeth, that these ancient surveyors were not playing around. They didn't have lasers. They had sky, plumb, cord, and stubbornness. And they got results good enough to make you feel a little embarrassed about how often you can't hang a picture frame straight. You imagine one of them, years into the project, passing by the pyramid's face and feeling that private satisfaction. The line stayed true. The corners held. The base remained square. The structure grew without drifting. That satisfaction is quiet, but it's powerful. A builder's pride isn't only in size, it's in correctness. And because the Old Kingdom is the Old Kingdom, correctness has a spiritual flavor. The monument isn't only straight because straight is good engineering. It's straight because the cosmos is supposed to be straight, balanced, aligned, ordered. A crooked pyramid would feel like a crooked universe. It would feel like admitting the river might not return, like admitting the stars might forget their paths. Nobody wants that kind of existential mess, especially not after a long day in the sun. The night begins to thin, almost imperceptibly. The black sky turns slightly less black, and the stars lose a bit of their sharpness. The surveyors keep working, calm and focused, finishing their alignments before the light changes the mood. The priest's presence lingers like incense that never fully dissipates. And you stand there, letting the scene settle into you. Tiny human figures organizing space under an infinite sky, treating a line in the sand as if it matters to eternity, because to them, it does. The seriousness is almost comedic, but the result is magnificent. A civilization turning observation into architecture, turning patience into precision, turning a quiet night of star-watching into a mountain of stone that still sits there, unblinking, waiting for sunrise. The last stars fade like someone quietly closing tiny shutters in the sky, and the first pale light starts brushing the horizon with that gentle, sleepy gray-blue that makes everything feel softer. The surveyor's cords and plumb lines don't look any less serious in this light. If anything, they look more intimate, human tools against a world too large to measure. And the longer you stand with them, the clearer it becomes that all this alignment isn't only about making stone sit pretty. It's about making a doorway behave. Because for the Old Kingdom, the pyramid isn't just pointing north like it's showing off. It's doing orientation like it's filing paperwork with the cosmos. A pharaoh's eternity depends on being placed correctly in the universe, the way a letter depends on having the right address. Get the address wrong, and your carefully prepared package, your name, your offerings, your whole afterlife plan, ends up floating around in the wrong neighborhood, awkwardly knocking on the wrong spiritual doors. And once you start thinking about the afterlife as an organized system, everything becomes strangely calming. Not because death is cozy, but because the Old Kingdom refuses to leave it vague. It refuses to leave it to improvisation. It turns the unknown into routine, and routine into reassurance. You walk again along the base of the pyramid, letting the growing daylight pick out the stone texture, and you imagine the invisible world the builders designed inside. There's a reason corridors are angled and chambers are placed like they are. They aren't only hiding a body. They're guiding a sequence, movement, transformation, access. The Old Kingdom afterlife isn't a dreamy fog where you float around thinking nostalgic thoughts. It's more like a well-run institution with rules, roles, and an oddly specific set of requirements. The king is expected to continue existing, not as a ghost drifting helplessly, but as a functioning being with needs and responsibilities. That's the part people miss when they picture ancient tombs. The whole system is built on the assumption that the dead can still receive, still travel, still eat, at least in a sacred sense. So the tomb becomes a supply station, a service desk, a place where reality and ritual meet, and where the living keep the whole thing stocked. The dead, in this worldview, are not passive. They're participants, and participation requires structure. One of the gentlest ways to feel that is to think about how many parts a person is allowed to have in Old Kingdom thinking. You're not just one single soul blob. You're a bundle of aspects that need to stay coordinated like a team that only works if everybody shows up. There's the body, obvious, physical, stubbornly important. This is why preservation matters, why the burial chamber is protected, why the temperature under stone is useful. A body is a home base, even if the person's awareness is imagined to move beyond it. Then there's the name, the run, carved into stone and written in text, because being spoken and remembered is not sentimental here. It's functional. If your name endures, you endure. Forgetting isn't just rude, it's dangerous. It's the cosmic version of deleting your account and pretending nothing will happen. There's the heart, the IB, considered the center of thought and feeling, not the brain, which is just sitting there minding its own business. In the Old Kingdom, the heart holds your truth. It's the part that matters when judgment and balance come up later in the story of Egyptian belief. And even early on, you can feel that importance in how carefully the body is treated. The heart is not just an organ. It's your moral resume. Then there's the Ka, often explained as a life force or vital essence. But it feels even more specific when you're standing here. The Ka is the part that needs nourishment. It's the part that receives offerings. And it's the reason a tomb is designed with places where offerings can be presented, so the Ka doesn't get left hungry in eternity. A starving Ka would be an unacceptable administrative failure. There's also the Ba, the aspect that can move, often imagined later in art as a bird with a human head, able to travel between worlds. The Ba is mobility. The Ba is the part of you that refuses to stay put, which is convenient, because the Old Kingdom built a tomb that's extremely interested in staying put. And then there's the Ak, the transfigured, affective spirit, the version of you that becomes luminous, functional, properly integrated into the cosmic order. The Ak is what you're trying to become. It's the end result of the system working. Body preserved, name remembered, Ka fed, Ba free to move, rituals performed correctly, alignment correct, offerings maintained. The Ak is the successful completion of the afterlife checklist. It's soothing in a very weird way, like hearing that the universe has an instruction manual. A strict one, sure, but still a manual. You don't have to guess what to do. You have to do what's written, what's practiced, what's repeated. And because it's the Old Kingdom, the repetition is everything. The funerary cult is part of that repetition, a whole ongoing service plan. The king doesn't just get buried and forgotten. Priests and attendants are meant to maintain offerings, recite formulas, keep the ritual relationship alive. You can almost picture it like a daily schedule posted on a wall, except the wall is temple stone and the schedule is keep the king functioning in the next world. Offerings are not just gifts, they're transactions. Bread, beer, water, meat, incense, presented in the right place with the right words at the right time. The food is physical, but the idea is that its essence is what matters, transferred through ritual to the Ka. The living then might consume the physical offerings afterward, which sounds practical because it is. The gods and spirits get the invisible portion. The living get lunch. Everyone stays calm. The system stays economical. No waste. The Old Kingdom would approve. Those offering formulas are one of the most hypnotic parts of all this. A few lines that show up again and again, asking for thousands of loaves, jars of beer, oxen, birds, linens, more abundance than any one person could physically consume, which tells you these aren't grocery lists. They're symbols of endless provision, written in a way that makes enough feel guaranteed. And the tomb architecture is designed to make these exchanges possible even when everything is sealed. That's where the false door returns in your mind, an elegant little paradox carved into stone. A door that doesn't open for bodies, but opens for spirits. A boundary you can't cross physically, but can cross symbolically. The Old Kingdom loved boundaries that could be negotiated through ritual. It's the same logic as wet sand under a sledge. You change the medium slightly, and suddenly movement becomes possible. Near the false door, there might be an offering table. You can imagine its surface worn smooth by repeated placements. Bread set down, beer poured, words murmured. The act is so repetitive it becomes soothing, a quiet rhythm that keeps anxiety from taking over. This is how a society manages the fear of loss. It gives grief a routine. Statues enter the picture here too, and they're not just decoration. A statue can serve as a backup body, a stable image that the spirit can recognize and inhabit if the physical body is damaged. It's redundancy. The Old Kingdom builds redundancy into eternity, which is honestly the most responsible thing anyone has ever done with the concept of forever. Some statues were kept in hidden rooms, serdabs, sealed chambers with tiny slits, allowing the statue to see offerings and rituals without being accessible to casual hands. You can almost feel the mindset, protect the image, but keep the connection. Hide it, but don't isolate it completely. Security, but with customer service. And then there are the texts, because of course there are texts. The Old Kingdom loves words that do things. Words that don't merely describe, words that activate. Spells, utterances, formulaic statements meant to protect, guide, empower. Early on, a lot of this knowledge is guarded. held by priests and ritual specialists, spoken aloud as part of ceremonies. Later in the Old Kingdom, it begins appearing carved inside pyramids as pyramid texts, especially toward the later dynasties, turning the king's tomb into a literal library of instructions. You can picture the calm confidence of carving words into stone. These instructions are not going to be misplaced. The tone of these utterances is both sacred and oddly practical. They talk about opening ways, removing obstacles, avoiding dangers, joining the stars, receiving offerings, being recognized. They're the ancient equivalent of a travel itinerary mixed with a legal document, but said with divine authority. Recognition is everything in this system. The king must be recognized by gods, recognized by ancestors, recognized by the cosmic forces that decide whether a being becomes effective, luminous, real in the next world. So there are rituals and names and titles and images, all reinforcing identity like a chorus repeating a refrain until the universe can't pretend it didn't hear. Even the placement of the pyramid within a complex helps with that recognition. There's a valley temple closer to the Nile, an interface between river world and desert world, then a causeway leading up to the mortuary temple by the pyramid itself. Movement through these spaces mirrors movement between worlds. Water to land, life to stone, public to sacred. The architecture teaches the story through walking. Standing here, you can feel how the Old Kingdom used process to soothe uncertainty. You don't just die. You go through steps, preparation, burial, sealing, offering rituals, ongoing cult maintenance, seasonal ceremonies. Everything has a place. Everything has timing. Even eternity gets scheduled because chaos is the enemy of comfort. And the comfort is not only for the dead. It's for the living. A society that builds pyramids is a society constantly looking death in the face because it's investing huge resources into it, making it visible on the horizon, turning it into a public landmark. If that sounds unsettling, the Old Kingdom solves it by making death predictable, structured, managed, part of order rather than a rupture. That's why Mott, order, balance, rightness, sits like an invisible foundation under everything. When people talk about Egyptian belief, Mott can sound abstract, but out here it feels tangible. It's straight chords, level basses, scheduled offerings, correct words, the conviction that the universe is not random if you do your part. You walk along the pyramid side and imagine the king's spirit moving, not floating in confusion, but traveling along a route that has been prepared. The internal passageways become symbolic arteries. The chambers become stations. The sealed stone becomes protection. The alignment becomes orientation. The rituals become fuel. There's a gentle humor hiding in the sheer amount of planning. The king is semi-divine, but he still needs a whole logistics department to function after death. Eternity apparently comes with maintenance. Even the gods, it seems, appreciate someone who read the instructions. And you can sense how this belief shaped daily behavior. If a person's continued existence depends on name and offerings and proper ritual, then living people have an incentive to remember, to maintain, to participate. Memory becomes duty. Care becomes stability. The dead remain woven into society, not as haunting presences, but as recipients of scheduled attention. It also explains the obsession with durability. Mud brick is fine for a house because you can rebuild it. Stone is necessary for a tomb because you can't exactly pop back in and renovate eternity every 10 years. The pyramid is an answer to a fear, the fear that the connection will break, that offerings will stop, that names will fade, that the king's Akh won't fully form, and the cosmic order will wobble. So they overbuild, they seal, they carve, they align, they set up a system that, in their minds, makes collapse less likely. The Great Pyramid becomes the ultimate insurance policy, written in limestone. As the daylight strengthens, the pyramid's face brightens slightly, and you can almost see the ghost of its original smoothness, the way it would have caught the sun like a sheet of light. That brightness isn't just aesthetic, it's symbolic. Light is order. Light is clarity. Light is the thing the king wants to join, to become part of, to ride across the sky with the sun's cycle, or to dwell among the steadfast stars that never set. The surveyor's work from earlier suddenly feels even more important. If the afterlife is travel, you need directions. If it's transformation, you need the right conditions. If it's recognition, you need your name placed where it will be seen by gods and remembered by people. Alignment isn't a technical obsession. It's part of the ritual machinery. You let that idea settle, slow and warm, like sand cooling under morning light. The Old Kingdom's afterlife isn't a dark unknown here. It's a carefully maintained system, a calm bureaucracy of eternity, where the most powerful king on earth still depends on bread, beer, words, and the steady hands of people keeping the schedule. Morning light slides across the limestone like warm water, and the pyramid's hard edges soften into a pale glow. After all that talk of soul parts and cosmic checklists, your mind almost expects the world to stay up in the sky. Stars, corridors, sealed chambers, names carved into stone. But the Old Kingdom always pulls you back down into the body, into heat on your shoulders, into skin that dries, into eyes that squint, into the simple, stubborn truth that humans still want to smell good and feel clean, even while building eternity. A faint scent rides the breeze, resinous, sweet, smoky. Incense, not the overwhelming kind that chokes a room, but a steady curl that clings to stone and linen. Somewhere in the mortuary temple, a burner is being tended with the same calm repetition you've seen everywhere. Light, feed, watch, repeat. The smoke rises in thin threads, and the air seems to smooth itself out, like the day just got quieter. Incense does more than flatter the gods. It changes your breathing. It marks a boundary, ordinary air outside, sacred air inside. In a dusty world, it's also just helpful. It blurs the sharp edge of sweat, the animal smells of a working settlement, the sour note of beer that's been sitting in the heat. Spiritual and practical at once, because the Old Kingdom never wastes a good habit if it can serve two purposes. As you drift closer, the temple shade feels cooler than it should, and the first thing you notice is cloth moving gently in the air. Linen, white, light, clean-looking even from a distance. It's one of the quiet luxuries of this age. Flax spun into fabric that breathes, dries fast, and feels comfortable when the sun is doing its worst. In a climate that punishes heavy clothing, linen is relief disguised as simplicity. You picture someone beating freshly washed linen to soften it, smoothing it with hands that know exactly how much force is enough. The whiteness isn't only fashion, it's visual order. Dusty world, bright cloth. Mess outside, clarity on your body. The same psychology as a straight cord line in the sand. Make something clean and predictable, and your mind relaxes a little. Linen isn't just clothing either. It's bandage cloth. It's wrapping. It's the soft interface between flesh and a landscape built from rock. When you think about the way bodies were prepared for burial, without sinking into anything grim, you realize linen becomes a kind of structure. Layer after layer, it turns fragility into form. The Old Kingdom doesn't only preserve kings. It wraps anxiety until it sits still. Then the scent of oil finds you, smooth and warm, sometimes mixed with something sharper like pine resin or spice. Oils are another small miracle in this world. Sun dries skin, wind scrapes it, sand works its way into every crease like it's personally offended by comfort. Oil protects. Oil softens. Oil makes dust less aggressive. A hand dips into a jar, rubs forearms, shoulders, scalp, and suddenly the body feels less like a tool and more like a home you're allowed to live in. Anointing is ordinary here, but it's also sacred. People oil themselves the way priests oil a god statue. The gesture is the same. Care, respect, maintenance. Even after a day of hauling limestone, a wash and a bit of oil can reset the nervous system. It's not luxury in the modern sense. It's survival with manners. Cleanliness has a seriousness in the Old Kingdom that feels quietly reassuring. In heat, washing is relief. In close quarters, it's courtesy. In temple life, it's requirement. Priests cleanse before rituals, shave hair to keep themselves pure, and, just as importantly, to avoid the tiny enemies of comfort, lice that do not care about your theology. So you shave. Smooth head, clean skin, fresh linen. The breeze touches your scalp, and it feels like you simplified your entire existence. There's gentle humor in how disciplined it all is. A civilization reaching for the stars, still doing battle with sweat and insects. Cosmic order plus basic hygiene. The great monuments are loud on the horizon, but the daily victories are small and human. Eyes matter in this bright world, so you notice the dark lines around them. Kohl. It's makeup, and it's also functional. It helps with glare, it calms irritation from dust, it frames the gaze with a steady, practiced hand. The look is iconic, but out here it's less fashion statement and more, I would like to see without suffering, thanks. Sometimes you picture a little cone of scented fat or wax set on a wig, softening the heat and releasing perfume slowly through the day. Low drama, high commitment to smelling civilized. Bodies get managed the same way. A pinch of mineral salts can work like a cleanser, a deodorizer, reset button after sweat. Mouths get rinsed, teeth get rubbed with gritty powders that aren't exactly gentle, but are very sincere about the concept of cleanliness. Comfort isn't always soft. Sometimes it's simply controlled. Hair becomes another quiet game of practicality and presentation. Shaved heads for cleanliness, wigs for ceremony and status. You can switch roles by changing what sits on your head. A worker keeps it simple. An official steps out in a carefully styled wig that turns rank into silhouette. It isn't deception. It's control, an image you can choose, the same way the tomb chooses how the king will be seen forever. Scent is part of that image too. Perfumes come from oils infused with herbs, flowers, and imported resins. Myrrh and frankincense and other aromatics travel in jars sealed tight, carried by boats and caravans, which means a temple burner doesn't only smell sacred. It smells like distance, like trade routes, like the Nile carrying more than stone. Your nose starts mapping the social world without effort. Temple air, resin smoke, and cool stone. Village air, bread, ash, sweat, beer. A wealthier house, cleaner linen, richer oils, a softer sweetness in the breeze. You don't need signs. Scent tells you where you are. And then the sun presses harder, and you remember that people here didn't just accept discomfort as fate. They experimented. They mixed pastes, oils, minerals, anything that might keep skin from burning or cracking. Which brings back the little piece of trivia that refuses to die. The one that's so weird almost feels like a dare. Crocodile dung sunscreen. It's the kind of phrase that jolts you awake just long enough to say, absolutely not, before your mind settles again. Ancient skincare could get creative, and some remedies, whether practical, symbolic, or just confidently passed along, sound like someone took a wrong turn at common sense. The real point isn't the gross-out factor. It's the impulse behind it. They were paying attention. They were trying to be comfortable in a world that could be brutal. Water makes that impulse feel real. Not a roaring river here, just basins, ladles, jars, quiet splashes, and shaded corners. Water is precious, so it's used with intention. A rinse isn't wasteful, it's restorative. Dust runs off hands, the skin cools, shoulders drop. A clean garment hangs to dry in sun, whitened and warmed by light. Cleanliness becomes a visible sign that order exists, that life is stable enough to keep dirt at bay. In the temple, the same acts become more ceremonial. Fresh linen, washed hands, anointing oil, incense offered with steady words. The senses are treated like pathways, smell guiding attention, touch grounding the body, sight framed and protected. You step across a threshold, and the air itself feels instructed to be calm. And under all of it, the pyramid keeps holding its place, huge and silent, while these small comforts move around it like a quieter kind of architecture. Wash, oil, dress, scent, repeat. Simple rituals practiced so consistently they become part of what order feels like in your own skin. The day brightens, the village stirs, smoke rises in thin lines that fade and reform. And somewhere a jar seal is checked, a cloth is folded, a hand rubs oil into cracked knuckles, preparing for another day of making eternity feel manageable. The oil on your skin has warmed under the sun, and the last curl of incense dissolves into the bright air like a thought you stop chasing. Linen flutters once, settles, and the whole complex feels newly awake. Clean bodies, clean cloth, clean lines of stone. Even the weird little memory of crocodile dung, sunscreen hangs in the background like a private joke the desert refuses to repeat out loud. And then you notice something else moving through this world with the same quiet certainty as the river and the stars. Family. Not the cozy, modern kind where everyone shares a streaming password and pretends that's love. This is royal family, which is basically a government wearing jewelry. It's a web of names, titles, marriages, inheritances, and the soft, constant pressure of being close enough to the throne that your life becomes part of the architecture. You follow a shaded walkway toward the spaces that feel less like a work site and more like a court's extended shadow. The air here smells different. Less ash, more perfume. Less sweat, more oils infused with expensive resins that arrived in jars sealed so tightly they might as well have been guarded secrets. Even the silence changes. In the village, silence is exhaustion. Here, silence is strategy. You can picture the Queen Mother in her own set of rooms. Cooler, quieter, scented with oils that don't smell like work. She speaks softly to officials who listen a little too carefully. She offers advice that sounds like tradition, but lands like instruction. She approves a marriage. She endorses a prince. She holds the court's memory of who belongs and who doesn't. In princes, there's never just one prince. You feel them like a restless current in the palace air. Young men with titles and expectations, trained in administration and ceremony, surrounded by tutors and attendants, each one a potential future king and a potential future problem. Some will become officials, governors, priests. Some will build their own tombs near the king's pyramid to keep proximity even in death, as if closeness to the center is a form of protection. Some will quietly disappear from the story, not necessarily through drama, but through the simplest, most ancient force, being less useful than someone else. Succession is always the quiet tension in a court. The old kingdom hides it under ritual, under the smoothness of order, but you can still feel it in the careful way titles are distributed. Who becomes vizier? Who is given control over a temple? Who is appointed to oversee a quarry? Who is assigned to manage a major building project? Those roles aren't only jobs, they are trust. And trust in a royal court is the same thing as power. The vizier, second only to the king in practical authority, often sits at the heart of administration like a calm spider in a web of paperwork. This is the person who makes sure the kingdom's rhythm doesn't trip over its own feet. Taxes collected, granaries managed, labor organized, justice administered, projects scheduled. When you imagine the Great Pyramid rising without chaos, you're imagining the kind of system a vizier supervises. The king is the symbol. The vizier is the function. And the royal family is woven into that function. Princes and relatives become officials. Nepotism isn't a dirty word here. It's the operating system. If you want loyalty, you put family in key roles. If you want continuity, you keep the web close. It's not always fair, but it is stable, at least until it isn't. Queens, too, can be linked directly to cult and temple life. Some hold priestly roles, especially connected with major deities like Hathor. That's not just spiritual decoration. Temple roles mean economic influence, because temples are wealthy institutions with land and staff and storage. A woman with a religious title can have her hands on resources that matter. Soft power, wrapped in ritual words, smelling faintly of incense and authority. You drift toward the smaller pyramids near the Great Pyramid, those satellite structures that don't dominate the skyline, but still claim their space with quiet insistence. These are often associated with royal women. Queen's pyramids, placed close to the king's monument like punctuation marks around a sentence. From far away, you might think they're minor. Standing near them, you realize proximity is the point. Their placement says, this family is not just human. This family is the structure of order. It's also a reminder that the pyramid age isn't only the story of one man's ego. It's a family enterprise, a dynasty projecting itself into stone. You imagine the queen's funerary arrangements, temples, offerings, staff assigned to maintain cult practices. Queens had their own afterlife logistics, their own rituals, their own need for continuity. If the king needs bread and beer in eternity, the queen does too. If the king needs his name preserved, so does she. The system doesn't relax for anyone. Eternity is equal opportunity bureaucracy. Behind the scenes, marriages knit alliances that keep the royal line coherent. Royal marriages can reinforce legitimacy, connect branches of the family, anchor political relationships. Sometimes the spouse is chosen not for romance, but for stability. Love is a luxury. Order is a necessity. The Old Kingdom chooses order. You can almost hear the court's polite conversation around it. Someone praising a marriage as auspicious, as harmonious, as pleasing to the gods, while everyone else quietly calculates what it means for succession. Who becomes stronger? Who becomes safer? Who is now one step closer to being the parent of the next king? And then there are the daughters, royal women whose titles often keep them close to the center, whose marriages can distribute legitimacy outward or consolidate it inward. A king's daughter is not just a family label. It's a political resource. She can tie a powerful official closer to the throne. She can keep inheritance within the royal sphere. She can become a queen in her own right. Her life is shaped by strategy, even if her voice is gentle. The whole court is full of gentleness that carries weight. That's what makes it feel like velvet chess. Nobody needs to slam a fist on a table to make the world change. They raise an eyebrow. They grant a title. They approve an offering endowment. They reassign an estate. They shift a marriage plan. And the pyramid keeps rising in the background, fed by decisions made in rooms that smell like oil and incense rather than sand and sweat. Even Khufu's own family becomes part of the landscape. The Queen Mother, figures like Hedifir's come to mind, are tied to the story not only through their names, but through burial arrangements, through the presence of royal women's tombs and associated goods that remind you how elaborate and carefully managed royal life was. These are lives lived with constant attention to continuity, wrapped in linen and sealed in stone, financed by estates that never sleep. The princes, too, leave their marks in mastabas near the pyramid. Long, rectangular tombs for high-status relatives and officials, arranged like a supporting cast around the star. Their placement isn't random. It's a social map frozen in sand. Closeness to the king equals closeness to order. If you can't be immortal by yourself, at least be immortal nearby. You start noticing how many quiet hands are guiding the pyramid age without ever standing at the top. A queen managing resources, a prince overseeing a quarry, a royal daughter's marriage tightening a network of loyalty, a queen mother smoothing succession tension with a single choice, a vizier turning all of it into schedules that keep the bread ovens working and the stone moving. And the humor slips in again, because for all this sacred language, it's still human. It's still people dealing with status and insecurity and ambition. Someone is jealous. Someone is flattered. Someone is pretending not to care while caring deeply. Someone is making a perfectly polite comment that is actually a tiny dagger. Someone else smiles and nods and files it away for later. The pyramids make this feel distant, but it isn't. You can feel the same logic in modern rooms where power sits. The difference is the Old Kingdom had the decency to build its office politics out of limestone and make it last for millennia, so everyone can see the result and quietly judge it. As you walk, the sun climbs and the stone brightens again, and the world feels both huge and oddly intimate. A family's decisions echo across a plateau. A marriage shifts the flow of titles. A queen's estate funds linen that wraps bodies that become ancestors. A prince's appointment affects the quarry output that affects the ramp schedule that affects the course of stones that rises another handspan toward the sky. The magnificence isn't only in the final shape. It's in the hidden power that kept the shape possible. Soft voices, careful titles, relationships managed like resources, the quiet insistence that order must continue because the alternative is chaos, and chaos is the one thing the old kingdom cannot tolerate. You stand with that thought until it becomes simple. Stone doesn't rise by itself. It rises because people agree through love, duty, strategy, and a little bit of sarcasm disguised as politeness to keep the machine running. The pyramid's shadow stretches across the plateau like a long, calm finger, and somewhere behind it, in shaded rooms, the dynasty keeps playing its velvet chess, moving pieces with hands that smell faintly of oil and incense. The shadow stretches, thin and long, and the plateau suddenly feels less like a single monument and more like a whole city made of intention. The Great Pyramid still dominates the skyline, the way a mountain dominates weather, but your attention starts drifting toward the smaller structures clustered around it. Quiet shapes half buried by time, built close enough to the king to share his horizon, but personal enough to feel like someone left their fingerprint in the sand. You move between them slowly, letting the stones speak in details instead of scale. A subsidiary pyramid sits lower, its lines softer, its presence less demanding. It doesn't try to overwhelm you. It waits. In bright daylight, it looks almost modest, like it knows it will never win the headline. Under that modesty is something intimate, the old kingdom's insistence that proximity matters. Not just in life, but in the long after. These satellite pyramids and Queen's pyramids don't feel like copies. They feel like companions. Their placement creates a kind of family geometry around the king, as if the dynasty tried to arrange itself in stone the way stars arrange themselves in constellations. Separate points of light forming one shape when you step back. And the tenderness is in the fact that even here, inside this massive state project, people still wanted closeness. They wanted their afterlife door to open near the king's door. They wanted their offerings to be placed within the same sacred neighborhood. They wanted their names carved where the king's shadow would pass, as if shadow itself could be a kind of blessing. You approach a mastaba nearby, flat-topped, rectangular, less dramatic than a pyramid, but quietly confident. The stonework is lower to the ground, more human in scale, and it changes your posture. You stop looking up and start looking in. The entrance area feels like a threshold between worlds, a place where the living once came close, spoke softly, placed food, and tried to believe that words could cross stone. The air here is different from the open plateau. It's warmer against the stone face, less windy, filled with the faint scent of dust and sun-heated limestone. Your footsteps sound louder in the stillness, and you instinctively slow down as if speed would be disrespectful. Not because anyone told you to, but because the space nudges you into restraint. The carvings, when they survive, are the real doorway. Not the physical opening, but the images cut into walls. Lines of hieroglyphs, figures in profile, offerings arranged as if abundance can be organized into neat rows. Faces that look serene, almost bored in that ancient way, as if eternity is a long meeting and they're determined to maintain good posture. This is where the pyramid age stops feeling like pure national ambition and starts feeling like individual lives preserved in a very specific language. A mastaba can show you a man and his wife seated together, slightly stiff but close. It can show children small at their feet. It can show servants bringing food, jars, linen, flowers. It can show the owner hunting in marshes, fishing, counting cattle, inspecting fields, scenes of daily life carved as if the person is stocking eternity with familiar activities. And the mystery deepens because these aren't only advertisements of status. They're memory devices. Someone chose to carve the things that made life feel like life. A particular kind of bird, a favorite type of bread, a boat on the Nile, a dog trotting alongside a master's legs. A moment of domestic calm in a world of stone and sun. You lean closer to a relief and notice how the lines soften around a wife's figure. How a hand is placed in a gesture that reads as affectionate even across millennia. It's subtle, but it lands. The old kingdom could be rigid, obsessed with rank and order, yet it still left room for the quiet human instinct to say, "We belong together." This intimacy sits right next to performance. The tomb owner's titles are carved prominently. Overseer of something important, priest of something sacred, administrator of some vital flow of grain or stone. Status is always present. Status is the currency that bought the tomb, the carvings, the location near the king. But the tenderness is threaded through it like linen through a weave. You can be powerful and still want your spouse remembered beside you. You can be a cog in the state's grand machine and still want your pet's name to survive. Those little pet names, when they appear, feel like the most human graffiti imaginable. The workers scribbling crew names inside the pyramid were leaving their mark. Here, elites leave theirs in a more formal way. But the impulse is the same. Don't let me vanish. Don't let what I loved vanish. You move along the chapel area where offerings would have been placed. The stone table might be worn, the surface smoothed by time, but you can imagine the repetition that once lived here. Bread, beer, water, incense, linen, words spoken softly, the kind that feel both sacred and routine, because ritual becomes routine when it has to keep working. And behind the carved wall, somewhere out of sight, there may have been a sealed chamber with a statue, the backup body again, the redundancy built into eternity. It's almost comforting, this insistence on having a plan B. A statue hidden but present, a slit that lets it see, a way for the dead to keep receiving without being disturbed. Security with a customer service window, still one of the old kingdom's most relatable design philosophies. The sunlight shifts, and you notice how these smaller structures cast their own shadows, shorter, gentler, like they're not trying to swallow the world. In those shadows, the plateau feels less severe. The Great Pyramid's shadow is authority. A mastabas shadow is familiarity. It's the difference between standing before a mountain and standing beside a house. You wander farther through the cemetery landscape, and the arrangement itself starts telling a story. The closer tombs cluster near the king, the more the sand becomes a map of influence. The most privileged get the nearest ground. Officials, relatives, high-ranking priests, the people whose lives were braided tightly into royal order. It's a quiet reminder that even in death, the old kingdom didn't suddenly become egalitarian. Eternity had zoning rules, but even that inequality has a strange calm to it because it's consistent. The system is predictable. You can almost hear it in the stone. Rank matters, closeness matters, titles matter, offerings matter, names matter. The same rules that shaped life shape the afterlife. There's comfort in consistency, even when it's unfair, because it means the universe isn't random. It means you can plan. That planning shows up in the details of the mastabas. They have chapels for offerings, false doors for spiritual movement, shafts leading down to burial chambers, and decorative programs meant to supply the dead with images of food and activity forever. If offerings fail, the carved images still exist. If the physical bread stops arriving, the bread carved in stone still sits there, eternally presented. It's a backup plan built into art, and it's hard not to respect the thoroughness. You pause at a relief showing a banquet scene, tables piled with bread loaves, fruits, jars, maybe a roasted bird. The sheer abundance looks almost comedic, like someone tried to order one of everything for a dinner party that never ends. The humor is gentle, but the intention is serious. Abundance is not only comfort, it's proof of order. A well-fed spirit is a stable spirit. A stable spirit contributes to a stable cosmos. Everything loops back to that same obsession with balance. The craftsmanship draws you in. Carved feathers on a bird's wing, the curve of a jar, the braid of a wig, the neat folds of linen. These details are the opposite of rushed. They're careful. Someone sat in this heat and cut stone into softness, as if stone could learn to be tender. And that's where the magnificence builds in a quieter way than the Great Pyramid. A giant triangle can impress you instantly. A carved hand resting on a spouse's shoulder takes longer, but it stays with you longer. The Old Kingdom's greatness isn't only in size. It's in the patience to preserve small human gestures. You keep walking, and the plateau becomes a gallery of lives frozen in their most important moments. A man shown receiving offerings. A woman shown with dignity and calm. Children shown smaller, not because they were less loved, but because scale is rank in this artistic language. Hierarchy carved into proportion. It's a reminder that art here is not trying to be a snapshot. It's trying to be a function. It shows what needs to be true. The more you absorb that, the stranger and more beautiful it feels. These tombs are machines made of imagery. They run on attention. They run on memory. They run on the belief that a carved loaf of bread can stand in for a real loaf when eternity stretches too long for practical deliveries. And yet, the living world keeps pressing through the stone. You see fishing scenes, hunting scenes, scenes of harvesting grain, herding cattle, boat journeys. The dead want the Nile, even if they're buried in desert. They want reeds and water and birds lifting off marshes at dawn. They want the smells and motions of life carried into the stillness of stone. You remember the workers' village, bread ovens, sleeping mats, bandaged hands, and the court's velvet chests. Titles, marriages, quiet power. All of it converges here in these smaller monuments. The officials who manage grain end up carved with grain. The priests who maintained rituals end up surrounded by ritual imagery. The relatives who depended on proximity end up buried near the king. It's a whole society folding itself into an afterlife map. Even the queen's pyramids nearby feel different when you approach them with this lens. They're smaller, yes, but they carry a particular kind of closeness. The king's monument is a public claim. A queen's monument can feel like a private vow made visible. Still official, still bound to status, but softened by the fact that it exists because relationships mattered. The dynasty wanted its women anchored in stone as well, their names protected, their cult maintained, their presence acknowledged beside the king's. The sun climbs higher and the plateau grows brighter, but the carvings hold their shadows in the grooves, making the images flicker as you move. A face seems to change expression for a second. A hand looks like it might reach. A bird looks ready to hop off the wall. It's an illusion, but it makes the place feel alive, like the dead are not entirely separate from the living here. They're woven into the landscape through repetition. Ritual repetition when the cult was active, visual repetition now as your eyes move from scene to scene. A breeze lifts a bit of sand, and it skitters along stone with a soft hiss, like the desert whispering its own commentary. You almost expect it to say something sarcastic about human ambition, how even the most powerful people still needed bread, beer, and a good skincare routine, and yes, some questionable sunscreen experiments. The plateau doesn't laugh out loud. It just keeps erasing edges slowly, reminding you that time is the only truly permanent resident here. And still, the intimacy survives. A carved scene of a couple seated together, a small figure of child, a pet under a chair, a list of offerings so detailed it reads like someone trying to keep anxiety under control through inventory. A name repeated, 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 as if saying it often enough will make forgetting impossible. You stand between the enormous and the personal, between the Great Pyramid's towering certainty and these smaller monuments that feel like whispered prayers. Magnificence surrounds you, but it's the quiet human notes that make the whole composition feel complete. The Pyramid Age isn't only a king reaching for stars. It's a society trying to carry love, status, memory, and routine into the one place no one can visit and report back from. The sun warms the stone under your palm, and for a moment the plateau feels less like a cemetery and more like a carefully curated neighborhood of eternity. Orderly, hierarchical, strangely tender. The Grand Triangle watches over everything, but it's the smaller shadows at your feet that make the story feel close enough to touch. The warmth on the stone feels steady, almost comforting, and the smaller shadows around your feet keep doing their quiet work, turning this massive plateau into something personal. A carved hand on a spouse's shoulder, a pet tucked beneath a chair, a loaf of bread rendered in stone as if hunger can be negotiated with imagery. It all feels so carefully arranged that your mind starts trusting it, like the Old Kingdom really did manage to build a world where everything has its place. And then, slowly, you notice the first hairline cracks. Not in the limestone blocks, but in the mood of the era itself. It's subtle at first. The way change usually is when it isn't trying to be dramatic. The Great Pyramid still stands with that unblinking confidence. The Queen's pyramids still sit nearby, like family punctuation. The mastabas still keep their carved stories. Nothing collapses in a cinematic way. Instead, the Pyramid Age begins to exhale. The pressure that once pushed stone upward starts to spread sideways, into provinces, into local power, into small shifts that feel harmless until you realize they're shaping the whole future. You walk beyond the most famous cluster of tombs, and the landscape starts showing you differences you might have ignored earlier. Some later pyramids are smaller, less sharply executed, their casing long gone, and their cores sometimes rougher. Even when the shape remains, the vibe changes. The monuments still want to be eternal, but the budget for eternity feels more carefully negotiated. Not cheap, just negotiated. The Old Kingdom's early confidence was fueled by a clean rhythm. The Nile's predictability, the state's centralized control, the ability to pull people and resources into one huge coordinated project. That kind of coordination is like holding a delicate stack of bowls. It looks stable until one bowl shifts a little. Once it shifts, you don't necessarily drop everything. You adjust. You rebalance. You start holding the stack differently. A big part of that adjustment is geography. Egypt is long. The Nile ties it together, but it also stretches authority thin. When the center is strong, officials on the ground act like extensions of the king's hand. When the center relaxes, even slightly, those officials start acting like they have their own hands. Provincial governors, nomarchs, are the kind of people who seem boring until you realize they're running entire regions. They manage land, labor, storage, local temples, and local loyalty. They collect and redistribute resources. They settle disputes. They keep things functioning far from the king's palace. When the state is humming, they're valuable administrators. When the state's grip loosens, they become power centers. At first, that doesn't feel like a problem. It feels like competence. A governor building better canals locally, investing in a temple, funding a tomb that's impressive enough to make the locals proud. The king benefits from a stable province, and the province benefits from a governor who can actually get things done. Everyone wins, but prestige has a way of wanting more prestige. As you drift through the idea of later Old Kingdom landscapes, you start noticing how elite tombs outside the capital regions become more elaborate, not because the king told them to, but because local officials are beginning to behave like miniature courts. They commission beautiful tomb art, claim impressive titles, and present themselves as the guarantors of order in their own territories. That shift is quiet, but it matters. In the early Pyramid Age, the king's monument is the unquestioned center of gravity. In a later phase, gravity starts developing local pockets. The universe still has a pharaoh, but the day-to-day experience of power can feel increasingly provincial. Closer to home, closer to the governor's estate, closer to the local temple that feeds people in lean months. Central authority doesn't vanish overnight. It thins, it stretches, and stretched systems start choosing smaller, safer projects. You feel that thinning in the pyramids themselves. The later Old Kingdom still builds pyramids, but often not with the same overwhelming scale and flawless finish that Giza represents. The focus seems to shift from sheer mass to something more controllable. A pyramid with a smaller footprint, perhaps a less monumental core, and sometimes a greater emphasis on what's written inside. It's as if stone starts sharing the burden of eternity with words. And words are cheaper than mountains. Inside some later pyramids, texts become increasingly important. Utterances carved into walls, instructions meant to keep the king effective in the afterlife. The idea feels almost like an evolution in strategy. If the monument can't rely only on its size to guarantee cosmic success, then the king's protection and power can be reinforced by language etched into the most private spaces. Carved spells become a second layer of architecture, made not of limestone, but of meaning. That's a fascinating psychological pivot. Early on, the pyramid itself is the main statement. Look how solid. Look how aligned. Look how permanent. Later, the statement gains another voice. Look how prepared. Look how instructed. Look how thoroughly the afterlife has been planned in text. The grandeur doesn't disappear. It changes form. You walk past the Great Pyramid again in your mind, and it still feels like the peak of a certain kind of certainty, centralized, unified, heavy with confidence. But nearby, the more human-sized monuments feel like they're already hinting at the next mood. A world where personal piety and local institutions become more visible, where the king's monopoly on the afterlife narrative begins to share space with broader participation. Even the religious atmosphere shifts, gently, like incense smoke choosing a new direction in a breeze. Solar imagery stays strong. Sun temples, sun symbolism, the king's relationship to the sky. But over time, there's also more emphasis on ideas of broader afterlife access, on texts and rituals that feel like they're spreading beyond a single royal body. It's not a sudden revolution. It's a gradual widening of the spiritual circle. And widening circles change budgets. Because the Pyramid Age's biggest monuments depend on surplus and control. A state has to be able to collect enough resources, hold enough stability, and direct enough labor in a coordinated way to keep a project of that scale from turning into a national headache. When provinces become more autonomous and resources circulate differently, the central state still exists, but its ability to concentrate wealth into one site becomes more limited. Add in the possibility of environmental pressure, periods when floods are less generous, harvests less predictable, and the whole system feels more fragile. The Nile's rhythm is the kingdom's heartbeat. When that rhythm stutters, even slightly, people adapt. Local leaders step in. Temples become more economically significant. The central court may have to make choices that prioritize immediate stability over another generation of mountain building. It's important that this doesn't have to look like catastrophe to matter. A few weaker flood years here and there, a few administrative struggles, longer distances, more local control. These are enough to change the feel of the age. The monuments reflect that. Pyramids become smaller. Materials might shift. The quality of certain components can vary. Not because builders forgot how to build, but because the state can't always afford to demand the very best version of everything at once. The Old Kingdom's earlier achievements were like a perfectly tuned machine. Later, the machine still runs, but it starts sounding different. A slight rattle, a slower pace, more reliance on local repair crews, literally and metaphorically. And the human response remains the same as it always is. You look for stability where you can find it. Local tombs begin to matter more. Local temples become more central to daily life. Governors commission monuments that make their regions feel proud and protected. People attach their sense of order to the institutions they can actually see and interact with, not just the distant shining triangle on a far plateau. You can almost feel the change in a craftsman's hands. Early on, his work is part of a project so huge it almost erases individuality, blocks and courses and schedules feeding a single royal mountain. Later, his work might be commissioned by a local elite who wants beauty and legacy closer to home. The same skill, different focus. Still magnificent, but distributed. That distribution brings its own quiet mystery. The Pyramid Age was never just one place. It was a national mood. When the mood spreads outward, the sense of one towering center diminishes, but the culture doesn't suddenly become less creative or less meaningful. It becomes more varied, more regional, less dominated by a single, unrepeatable scale. You move through that idea slowly, letting it settle like dust in still air. The Great Pyramid remains the loudest note, but other notes begin to show themselves. Tombs, temples, inscriptions, local art, local authority. The kingdom is still Egypt, still ordered, still ritualized, still deeply committed to making life and death behave according to rules. But the rules are being maintained by more hands and more places. Even the humor shifts. In the height of Giza, the joke is that the king is semi-divine but still needs a logistics department and apparently sunscreen so questionable you'd rather not think about it too hard. Later, the joke becomes that everyone is building their own version of permanence because the center isn't the only place where eternity gets planned anymore. The universe is still orderly, but the paperwork has been delegated. You pause near the edge of the plateau where the desert falls away toward the valley again, and the Nile's green line seems almost delicate from this height. It's easy to imagine how quickly stability can feel fragile when you zoom out. How much depends on the river's generosity, on the state's ability to coordinate, on local leaders choosing cooperation over rivalry. And yet, there's no dramatic collapse in the feeling of this moment. It's a long, slow easing. The Pyramid Age loosens its grip on the idea that the biggest possible stone statement is the only way to guarantee permanence. It starts trusting other forms: text, temple, local cult, distributed authority. The Grand Triangle still watches over everything, but the future is already learning to carry itself differently. The plateau holds the old confidence like a memory etched into rock. The wind moves gently, not caring about dynasties, smoothing the edges of monuments that were built to resist smoothing. And you stand there in that bright, quiet air, feeling the old kingdom's magnificence shift from a single, overwhelming peak into a landscape of subtler power. Still mysterious, still beautiful, just less concentrated. The stone hasn't stopped speaking. It has simply changed its tone. The plateau keeps its quiet confidence, even with that new, thinner tone you notice settling over the later years. Stone doesn't panic when administrations change. It just stays, and staying is the whole point. You walk back toward Giza with the day growing long, letting everything you've gathered stitch itself together without effort. The Nile's dependable pulse, the bread and beer engine of labor, the cords stretched under stars, the queen's soft power moving like perfume through shaded rooms, the carved hands in mastaba chapels, the practical weirdness of somebody earnestly proposing crocodile dung sunscreen with a straight face. It all belongs to the same world, a world that tried to make eternity feel manageable by making it organized. At the base of the Great Pyramid, the limestone blocks look warmer now, sunlight caught in their grain like honey trapped in stone. You can almost see the monument the way an old kingdom farmer might have seen it from the fields. Less a tourist miracle, more a constant landmark, a bright triangle announcing that the center still holds. When it was new, smooth casing stones would have turned this entire face into a single plane of light. The edges would have been sharper. The surface would have looked almost unreal, like a frozen sunbeam. That isn't just vanity, it's a message. Light belongs to order. Light belongs to the gods. Light belongs to a king who wants to keep working even after his heart stops. You trace the complex in your mind. The valley temple near the river. The causeway rising like a deliberate sentence. The mortuary temple pressed against the pyramid's base. The satellite structures tucked around it like quiet companions. Nothing here is random. Every placement is a relationship between water and desert, between public life and sealed stone, between the living who maintain offerings and the dead who depend on those offerings to stay effective. Even the boats buried nearby, waiting in pits, feel like a calm reminder that the afterlife wasn't imagined as lying still forever. Eternity had routes. Eternity had travel plans. And the thing that still catches you, even after all the how, is the calm audacity of the why. A state looked at the fear of being forgotten and answered with geometry. A culture looked at the unpredictable parts of life, illness, loss, the way a good day can end too fast, and answered with routine. Stretch the cord, level the base, record the rations, pour water on the sand, fit the casing stone, speak the offering formula, repeat, repeat, repeat. The old kingdom treated repetition like a spell, because repetition is how you tame chaos without pretending chaos doesn't exist. You remember the workers' village, tight lanes, ovens, water jars, bandaged hands, quiet laughter. That village is the pyramid's most human face. It's easy to worship stone. It's harder to notice the people who kept showing up. Yet their lives are everywhere in the project. In the logistics, in the heel bones, in the crew pride that wrote its nicknames where no royal I was supposed to see. The pyramid is a king's monument, but it is also a monument to cooperation, to a society that could synchronize thousands of ordinary mornings into one extraordinary result. You glance toward the smaller pyramids and mastabas, and the scale of memory widens. The pyramid age isn't only Khufu's silhouette. Its queens anchored close to the center, their names carried forward through estates and rituals. Its princes and officials building their own quiet claims near the king, hoping proximity itself could last. Its artists carving banquets and fishing scenes so a dead person could keep the Nile in their pocket. It's a civilization insisting that daily life, bread, birds, boats, linen, jokes, deserve to be preserved as carefully as royal power. Then you think about the later shift again, not as a failure, but as a change in strategy. Central power spreads outward. Local leaders grow louder. Pyramids become smaller, and words become more prominent, carved into interior walls like a second skeleton of protection. It feels less like decline and more like the culture learning to distribute its sense of order, sharing it with more places, more temples, more local hands. The Grand Triangle remains the loudest proof of what's possible, but the rest of the landscape starts carrying the weight too. That weight is still here, even now, long after the Old Kingdom's officials stopped checking rope fibers and scribes stopped counting jars. The pyramids keep doing what they were built to do: hold a place in human attention. They still pull your eyes upward. They still shrink your worries just by existing. They still make time feel like something you can touch. You walk along the pyramid's shadow as the sun lowers, watching it stretch across the plateau until it reaches toward the smaller tombs like a slow, protective hand. The light turns softer, the air cools, and the stones begin to lose their glare. The day's harshness slips away, replaced by that familiar evening calm. It's the same calm that would have settled over the work crews as they stopped hauling for the day, wiped dust from their faces, and headed back to the village for bread, beer, and the kind of tired silence that feels earned. When the first stars come out, you look up and remember the cord stretchers waiting for a pair of lights to line up perfectly. You remember how a plumb line can turn a sky into directions. You remember how a simple tool, used patiently, can produce accuracy that still makes modern people blink and double-check. The Old Kingdom didn't need to shout at the universe. It watched the universe, learned its habits, and built in harmony with them. The pyramid's outline sharpens against the deepening sky. For a moment, It feels like you're standing inside the same equation the builders stood inside. Earth below, stars above, a human life in between, trying to fit itself into something that lasts. And maybe that's the real legacy. Not the stones alone, but the mindset, steady, methodical, almost stubbornly hopeful, that says you can respond to impermanence with craft. You stand there long enough that the plateau feels less like a sight and more like a presence. The desert air cools your skin. The fan hum memory from your room blends with the whisper of sand against stone. The Great Pyramid doesn't ask anything from you. It simply offers scale. It offers stillness. It offers the gentle reminder that people before you solved their fears by building, by organizing, by caring for details, by making sure tomorrow had bread, and the next world had offerings, and the king had a path to the stars. The stars continue their slow work overhead, and the river continues its quiet work in the valley, unseen but certain. The old kingdom is gone as a political machine, but its calm habits remain in the shapes it left behind. Straight lines, level foundations, names carved deep, stories preserved in relief. The soft insistence that order can be made. You keep your gaze on that dark triangle a little longer, letting the edges blur as your eyes relax. The night feels wide but not lonely. It feels spacious, like a room with the door left slightly open. Your breathing becomes simple again. Cool air in, warm air out. The stone holds the day's heat gently, releasing it in slow breaths of its own. The desert doesn't rush you. It never has. Somewhere, far beyond the plateau, the Nile keeps moving with that patient, steady confidence, and you don't need to see it to trust it. The river returns. The seasons turn. The stars keep their quiet appointments. Nothing is demanding anything from you in this moment. Thoughts can loosen. Details can fade one by one. The ropes and sledges, the surveyor's cords, the perfumed oils, the carved banquets, even that ridiculous sunscreen idea, until only the feeling remains, a calm, ancient steadiness, as if the world knows how to hold itself together. Your shoulders soften, your jaw unclenches. The muscles that carried your day can finally stop trying to prove anything. The pyramids aren't impressed by effort. They're impressed by endurance, and you've already endured enough for one day. A faint breeze slides past, and the world feels safely indifferent to your worries. Your eyelids grow heavier, like curtains easing closed, slow and gentle, no struggle. The plateau grows quieter, the stars a little softer, the desert air a little cooler. In the distance, the pyramid stays exactly where it is, like a gentle promise that some things can remain stable even when everything else changes. If sleep comes quickly, that's perfect. If it comes slowly, that's perfect too. There's no deadline here, no schedule to chase, no one pulling on your rope. Just stone, sky, and a slow, reassuring hush, almost a whisper.